The first label Ruth found was stuck to her side of the bed. Marcy, guest room, it said, in black marker on blue painter's tape. Ruth stood in the doorway with a basket of clean towels pressed against her stomach. She read the words twice, then looked behind her as though another woman might be standing there, someone whose bed had already been promised to her daughter. Glenn, in here. He was in the bathroom fighting with the electric razor. Ruth carried the basket down the hall without answering. A second strip of blue tape crossed the guest room dresser. Daniel. One lamp said, "Cell." The other said, "Marcy." On the living room hutch, a label the length of Ruth's hand declared Marcy in capital letters. She followed the faint squeak of a marker into the kitchen. Daniel was crouched beside the table, where his father ate oatmeal every morning. Marcy stood near the refrigerator, holding a roll of tape. Both were still wearing their coats. "What are you doing?" Ruth asked. Daniel glanced up. "Getting a head start." Marcy smiled too brightly. "Since you two delayed everything, we thought we'd use today to organize." Daniel smoothed a fresh label onto the table's scarred oak edge. Trash. Ruth set the basket down very carefully. "Where?" she asked. "Are your father and I supposed to eat until spring?" Neither of her children answered quickly enough. Marcy recovered first. She always did. At 52, she had turned recovering first into a life skill. "Oh, Mom, nobody's taken the table today." She held up the tape as if presenting evidence of harmlessness. "We're just identifying where things will eventually go." "Eventually?" "Yes. And you identified our bed as yours." Marcy's mouth tightened. "That set is too big for the condominium. The condominium we're not moving into. You said you were postponing." "We said we were not moving there. Temporarily," Daniel added, rising with one hand against the table. "You said you'd revisit it in the spring." Ruth looked at him. Daniel had been handsome as a young man in a careless, uncombed way. At 49, he was still handsome when he needed something. Today his cheeks were pink from the cold, his hair recently cut, his smile ready for use. "We said we would revisit moving," Ruth told him. "Not that condominium. Same general concept. No, it isn't." From the back of the house came Glenn's slow, uneven tread. He entered the kitchen with half his face shaved and the razor still in his hand. "There you are," he said to Daniel. "I thought I heard somebody." "Apparently not the part where they came in," Ruth said. "They used their keys." Marcy gave Ruth a pointed look. "You don't answer your phone." "I was carrying laundry. We called twice, within the same minute." Marcy peeled another strip of tape from the roll. "I told you we were coming over to sort today. You told me you were free today. That was the implication?" "To whom?" Daniel reached for the marker Marcy was holding. "Can we not turn Painter's tape into a federal case?" Ruth watched him write something on the next strip. "What does that one say?" "Patio. For whom?" He gave her a patient look. "I haven't decided yet. It's our patio." "I know, Mom." "Then I suppose that decides it." Glenn switched off the razor. In the sudden quiet, the refrigerator made a wet clicking sound it had been making since Thanksgiving. Glenn had promised to look at it. Ruth had promised herself she would stop reminding him. "Why don't we all have some coffee?" he said. Marcy closed her eyes. "Dad, this is exactly the problem." "What is?" "You think coffee is a plan?" "No. Coffee is coffee. But people are generally less foolish after they've had some." Daniel pulled out a chair. "I'll take mine black." "You know where the pot is?" Ruth said. He paused, then went to get it. That tiny refusal gave her more satisfaction than it should have. For nearly 50 years, Ruth had filled cups while carrying on conversations about budgets, divorces, dead batteries, bad bosses, leaking roofs, and one memorable Christmas Eve when Daniel had arrived with his belongings in lawn bags and announced that his marriage had reached a natural conclusion. Ruth had made coffee that night, too. Marcy sat at the kitchen table, but kept the tape looped around her wrist. It made her look like a very efficient prisoner. Glenn lowered himself into his usual chair, the one nearest the window. His knee gave a small crack. Daniel glanced at the blue label. "This table really is shot, Dad." "It's a table," Glenn said. "I'm just saying nobody's going to want it." "I want it," Ruth said. Daniel opened a cabinet and took down 4 mugs. "You're not going to fit all this stuff in a smaller place." "That's why we're doing this." "No," Ruth said. "You're doing this because we asked everyone to leave us alone for a week." Marcy's expression shifted. Not guilt exactly. More like offense at an inaccurate entry in a ledger. We did leave you alone for 2 full days. It's Sunday. You made the announcement Friday afternoon. It wasn't an announcement, it was a conversation. You called me at work to tell me you had canceled the photographer, delayed the listing, and withdrawn from Hawthorne Court after I spent 3 months helping you arrange everything. That rises to the level of an announcement. Glenn rubbed the unshaved side of his chin. We know you put in time. I measured every room. I know. I found the movers. I know, honey. I changed my entire March schedule. Ruth looked at the roll of tape around Marcy's wrist. And we appreciated it. You didn't even talk to me first. That's an interesting complaint. Marcy stared at her. The coffee maker gave a final asthmatic gurgle. Daniel filled the mugs but left Ruth's on the counter. She almost stood automatically. Instead, she waited. After a moment, Glenn noticed and reached for it. He pushed it across the table to her. Daniel sat down. Look, if this is about the deposit, maybe the condo people will still work with you. It's not about the deposit, Ruth said. You lost $4,800. Thank you, Daniel. I had forgotten in the last 48 hours. That's not nothing. We know it's not nothing. Then why walk away? Ruth looked at Glenn. He studied the steam rising from his mug as if it contained small print. They had asked each other the same question on Thursday night. Ruth had been in the condominium kitchen, standing between the refrigerator and the counter while Glenn tried to open the dishwasher behind her. They had bumped hips, apologized, moved in opposite directions, and blocked each other again. The dining nook had been staged with a glass-top table for two. No room for leaves, no room for the walnut hutch, no room for more than 2 people unless someone ate with a plate in his lap. Marcy had called it cozy. On the drive home, Glenn had said almost nothing. At a red light, Ruth had finally asked, "Do you like it?" He had watched the turn signal blink green on the dashboard. "I thought you did. I asked if you did. I thought it made sense." That had not been an answer. It had been the scaffolding, holding up most of their recent decisions. Now, Marcy and Daniel waited for Ruth to explain why 2 old people had disrupted a perfectly reasonable plan. "I don't want to move into a place neither of us likes," she said. Marcy sat back. "That's it? That seems sufficient? You liked it in November. I wanted to like it in November. There are waiting lists, Mom. You can't expect the perfect place to appear. I don't. You need 1 floor. Dad needs less upkeep. You complain about the utility bills. The taxes go up every year. Hawthorne has transportation if either of you stops driving." Ruth heard the phrase "either of you" and understood it meant her. Glenn had stopped driving after dark 2 years ago, but no one included that in the family's definition of independence. Ruth drove, therefore they drove. "All of that can be true," she said, "and the condominium can still be wrong." Daniel blew across his coffee. "So, what's the new plan?" "We don't have one yet." He and Marcy exchanged a look. It lasted perhaps half a second. Ruth saw the whole conversation inside it. "This is what we were afraid of." Glenn saw it too. His jaw shifted. "We're allowed to take a little time." "Of course you are," Marcy said quickly. "But taking time doesn't make the house smaller. It doesn't fix Dad's knee. It doesn't make this stuff disappear." She gestured toward the rooms around them, and for the first time Ruth understood that Marcy no longer saw a house. She saw a problem measured in cubic feet. The walnut hutch had come from Glenn's mother. Its lower left door swelled every summer and had to be pulled with both hands. Daniel had hidden cigarettes behind the good plates when he was 20. Marcy had once slammed that same door so hard during an argument that the little brass latch broke. Glenn had replaced it with one that did not quite match. Stuff. Ruth took a drink of coffee. It was already cooling. "Who told you that you could have the hutch?" she asked. Marcy glanced toward the living room. "Nobody told me. I assumed." "Based on what?" "I'm the one with a dining room. So are we." "For now?" Glenn set his mug down. Daniel pointed toward the hall with his thumb. "What about the desk?" "Dad and I talked about that." Ruth turned to Glenn. "You did?" Glenn's ears reddened, an old and reliable betrayal. It came up. "When?" "A while ago." "How long is a while?" "Christmas, maybe." Daniel leaned forward. He said, "I could have it when you moved." I said, "Probably," Glenn replied. "You said you couldn't take it with you." "That was when we thought we were moving to Hawthorne. It's a desk, not a marriage vow." "No," Ruth said. "Those apparently come with fewer assumptions." Glenn gave her a wounded look. She regretted the sentence before it fully left the table, but not enough to retrieve it. Marcy pushed her chair back. Fine. We tried to help. Clearly this isn't a good day. You've labeled 17 things, Ruth said. It was a productive day. Mom? What? You're acting like we came over with a hearse. The room went still. Marcy's face changed as soon as she heard herself. Daniel looked down into his coffee. Glenn pressed his thumb against a nick in the tabletop. Ruth rose. Her legs felt steady, which seemed important. You're right, she said. A hearse would have waited. She walked into the living room. Behind her, Marcy said her name, but Ruth kept going. The blue strip on the walnut hutch came away with a soft tearing sound. She folded it once, trapping Marcy's name inside. The label on the lamp followed, then the one on the guest room dresser. Daniel appeared at the end of the hall. That tape doesn't damage anything. Good. We were only trying to figure out what goes where. So am I. She reached the bedroom and pulled the label from the footboard. Marcy stood behind Daniel now, pale and angry and sorry in proportions Ruth could not yet measure. Glenn remained in the kitchen. Ruth folded the last label around the others until she held a small blue square. Nothing in this house has been assigned, she said. Not the furniture, not the rooms, not your father, not me. Marcy opened her mouth. Ruth dropped the wad of tape into her own pocket. And until we decide where we're going, she said, you can stop deciding what happens after we're gone. That is not what I meant, Marcy said. Ruth kept her hand in her pocket around the wad of tape, its folded edges pressed into her palm. Then, you should be relieved I misunderstood. Can we please lower the temperature? Daniel asked. He had followed them down the hall, but remained behind Marcy, letting her occupy the dangerous ground. We're talking about furniture. You are, Ruth said. Glenn came out of the kitchen carrying the coffee mugs. Let's give everybody some room. Marcy turned on him. I came here to help you. I know you did. I gave up my Sunday. Nobody asked you to. The words were gentle. That made them land harder. Marcy blinked at her father. Ruth saw the familiar calculation begin. How much Marcy had done, how much acknowledgement was due, how little had been received. It was not entirely imaginary. She had made calls, toured properties, created a binder with plastic dividers. She had spent a Saturday measuring walls while Glenn wandered behind her, making jokes about where they might put the moose head they did not own. The trouble was that Marcy treated every favor like a steering wheel. Daniel retrieved his coat from the dining chair. Call me when this becomes a normal conversation. You were writing trash on my table, Ruth said. Normal had already left. That table has a split underneath. Then don't sit on it. I'm trying to save you money. By giving yourself your father's desk? Daniel pulled on his coat with two sharp movements. Dad offered me the desk. Probably, Glenn said. Right. I forgot we were parsing every word now. You seem interested in the exact wording on the tape. Daniel gave a short laugh with no humor in it. You two are unbelievable. Ruth almost said, so were the rent checks, but stopped herself. Old generosity made ugly ammunition. Once used, it could never become generosity again. Marcy removed the tape roll from her wrist and set it on the dresser hard enough that it rolled against the lamp. I'm sorry about what I said, she told Ruth. It came out wrong. All right, that doesn't mean this whole thing is reasonable. There it is. I can be sorry and still think you're making a mistake, and I can accept the first part without requesting the second. Marcy looked toward Glenn, waiting for translation into softer language. He shifted the mugs in his hands. Your mother and I need some time, he said. Ruth noticed the order of the words. Your mother and I. Not your mother, not Ruth wants. It was a small thing, but she held on to it. Marcy picked up her purse. Fine, take time. She walked toward the front door, then turned. The photographer charges a cancellation fee. I know, Ruth said, and the mover's estimate was only guaranteed through the end of the month. We know. The Hawthorne refund won't include the application fee. We know, Marcy. I'm making sure. Marcy pressed her lips together. Daniel opened the door, bringing in a wedge of February air. Sunday dinner next week? Glenn asked. Daniel looked at Marcy. Marcy looked at Ruth. We'll see, she said, and stepped outside. The door closed. Daniel's car started first, though Marcy had parked behind him. Ruth watched through the front window as he backed halfway onto the lawn to get around her. His right rear tire cut into a soft patch beside the driveway. He's going to leave a rut, she said. Glenn came to stand beside her. I'll fill it. With what knee? My regular one. You don't have a regular one anymore. Well, I'm not filling it with the fancy knee. She nearly smiled. The smile rose and disappeared before it reached her mouth. Marcy sat in her car with both hands on the steering wheel. For a moment, Ruth thought she might come back. Then the brake lights flashed, and she followed Daniel down the street. Glenn carried the mugs to the kitchen. Ruth remained at the window until both cars turned the corner. The house was quiet in a newly unpleasant way. It had never bothered her to be alone there. Even when Glenn was out, the rooms had felt occupied by purpose. The clock in the living room ticked. The furnace stirred. A branch scraped the gutter above the guest room. Now the quiet felt watchful, as if the furniture had heard itself discussed. Ruth found the roll of tape on the dresser and carried it into the kitchen. How many labels did you see? She asked. Glenn was pouring the coffee back into the pot, an economy Ruth had never understood. 5 or 6. There were more, I figured. You knew they were doing it? No. You didn't notice Daniel putting his name on the desk? I was shaving. For an hour? I had other activities. What activities? He looked around, private ones. Glenn, I was in the garage first, then the bathroom. I didn't conduct surveillance on our children, because it never occurred to me they'd tag the furniture like a church rummage sale. Ruth put the tape beside the sugar bowl. You told him he could have the desk. I told him he could probably have it if it didn't fit. When were you planning to tell me? When it became relevant? It became relevant at Christmas. No. At Christmas, it was a conversation between him and me, about our desk, my desk. The distinction hung there. Ruth folded her arms. I see. That didn't come out right. It was admirably clear. Glenn set the coffee pot down. My father gave me that desk. And for 53 years, I dusted it, paid bills at it, stored our tax returns in it, and kept you from refinishing it with that orange stain you bought in 1987. It was not orange. It was called Autumn Flame. That doesn't mean orange. It means they were afraid to write orange on the can. Glenn turned away, but she saw his mouth move. Don't laugh, she said. I'm not. You are. Only about the stain. She sat in the chair labeled for destruction. Do you want Daniel to have the desk? Glenn leaned back against the counter. I thought I did. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have. Ruth waited. He rubbed the top of his bad knee. He was here at Christmas. He came into the den while you and Marcy were talking about Hawthorne. He said he'd always liked the desk. I said if we couldn't take it, he could probably have it. That sounds more reasonable when you include all the words. I usually do, not today, no. Through the window over the sink, Ruth could see the garage roof and the bare crown of the maple tree. Glenn had planted that tree the second spring they owned the house. For years he had threatened to cut it down because the roots lifted one corner of the walkway. Every fall he praised the color as if he had personally arranged it. I don't want us to become people who fight over chairs, she said. We're not fighting over chairs, not yet. We're fighting because our children acted like jackasses. The words startled a laugh out of her. Glenn looked pleased with himself. Don't enjoy that too much, she said. I haven't had coffee. You poured it back. I can pour it out again. They spent the next hour searching the house. A cell label hid behind the shade of the brass floor lamp. Marcy was stuck inside the hutch rather than outside it, as if her daughter had anticipated objections and moved her claim out of sight. The patio furniture had been divided. Daniel's name on the table, Marcy's on 4 chairs, Cell on the rusted umbrella stand. In the den, Daniel crossed the curved lid of the roll-top desk. Glenn peeled it off himself and placed it on the blotter. The guest room closet contained 3 boxes Ruth had not opened since her mother died. None had been labeled. Apparently, grief in cardboard boxes had no immediate market. She found donate on the back of her sewing rocker. That one stopped her. The rocker was not valuable. Its seat cushion had flattened into the shape of her body, and the finish had rubbed pale where her hands rested. She had bought it at a consignment shop when she was 32, after spending 6 months putting $5 bills into an envelope in the flour can. Glenn had thought they needed a new water heater more. He had been right, but the heater was long gone, and the chair remained. Ruth sat down in it. Glenn stood in the doorway. You want to keep that? I don't know. You use it. I sit in it. That may not be the same thing. He looked at the label in her fingers. You don't have to decide today. That's apparently controversial. The doorbell rang before he could answer. Ruth slipped the label into her pocket with the others and went to the front door. Inez Rios stood on the porch holding a glass casserole dish with a red plastic lid. She wore a purple wool hat pulled low over her ears and looked annoyed by the weather. "You left this at my place," she said. "If I keep it any longer, it becomes common law property." Ruth opened the storm door. "Come in before you freeze. I can't stay. My grocery order is supposed to come sometime between noon and the resurrection." Inez stepped inside anyway. At 68, she was younger than Ruth, but had been a widow longer. Her husband, Mateo, had died 11 years earlier after an illness that had filled her house with equipment and well-meaning people. She had sold the place the following year and moved into an apartment 3 streets away. Marcy often referred to her as Ruth's widow friend, as though bereavement were a position in a club. Inez looked toward the rocker. "What happened in here? What do you mean? You have clean rectangles on dusty furniture." Glenn glanced at Ruth. "Our children labeled everything," Ruth said. Inez considered this. "For prices? For themselves?" "Ah, that's all you have to say?" "I'm choosing from several responses." Glenn took the casserole dish. "Coffee, fresh, recently reheated in concept. I'll risk it." 5 minutes later, Inez sat at the kitchen table, reading the labels Ruth had unfolded across the surface. Marcy's name appeared 3 times. Daniel's appeared 4. Sell and donate occupied the middle. Trash lay nearest Inez's elbow. "They put that one on this table?" she asked. Daniel's tire tracks were visible through the window behind her. "Yes." Inez ran one finger over the split near the edge. "Rude, but structurally informed." Ruth laughed despite herself. Then Inez lifted the label from the rocker. "Do you want to donate it?" "I don't know." "Do you want Marcy to decide?" "No." "There you go. One decision made." "It doesn't tell me what to do with the chair." "No, but it tells you who doesn't get to do it." Glenn lowered himself into the chair beside Ruth. He had found his cane in the den, but leaned it against the table, as if hoping no one would notice. Inez looked from him to Ruth. "Where do you want to live?" "Somewhere smaller," Ruth said. "That is a square footage answer. Near things." "Things like what?" Ruth opened her mouth and found nothing ready. Marcy had asked whether there was transportation. Daniel had asked about resale. The realtor had asked their price range. The Hawthorne woman had asked whether they preferred the courtyard or parking lot view. No one had asked what they wanted to be near. Glenn traced the rim of his mug. "My workshop." Ruth turned to him. He shrugged. "If we're making a list." Inez nodded. "Good. What else?" "Morning light," Ruth said. It sounded small, spoken aloud. It also sounded true. Inez pushed the labels into a loose pile. "Then start there." After she left, Ruth washed the casserole dish Inez had just returned, dried it, and put it back in the cabinet by mistake. Glenn did not point this out. Near dusk, Marcy sent a message. "I shouldn't have used the word hearse. I'm sorry. We can talk when everyone is calmer." A second message followed before Ruth could answer. "Please don't throw away the room measurements. Lynn already checked, and the hutch fits perfectly on their long wall." Ruth read it twice. Then she carried the phone into the den, where Glenn was sitting at the roll-top desk. The blue label bearing Daniel's name was gone from the blotter. "Where did you put it?" she asked. He opened his hand. The tape was folded into a square, just like hers. "I don't know what I want to keep," he said. Ruth sat beside him. "Neither do I." Outside, a car passed, its headlights moving across the walls and over the old desk before disappearing. "Then we'd better find out," she said, "before everyone else does." Ruth pulled a yellow legal pad from the desk drawer. Glenn found a pencil with a hardened pink eraser and sharpened it into the wastebasket with the little brass sharpener his father had once screwed to the side of the desk. "Your workshop," she said, writing it down. "Morning light, room for the table." She looked at him. "You heard me defend it, so now you want it?" "I wanted it before. I just didn't know it was endangered. It has a split underneath." "So do I." She added the table. "2 bathrooms," Glenn said. "For 2 people? For 53 years I've watched you dry pantyhose over the shower rod. I haven't worn pantyhose since the first Bush administration. I'm not gambling on it." She wrote 2 bathrooms. They continued until the page held 12 requirements, several of which contradicted the words smaller. Glenn wanted a garage large enough for a workbench. Ruth wanted a kitchen with enough room to open the dishwasher without backing into her husband. They wanted to remain near their doctors, though neither liked either doctor enough to name him. They wanted no stairs, reasonable taxes, a spare room, a decent grocery store, and neighbors who were near enough to notice smoke, but not near enough to notice pajamas. How far from Marcy? Ruth asked. Glenn turned the pencil between his fingers. Not terribly far. That isn't mileage. What would you put? Ruth considered writing far enough. The thought felt satisfying and childish. Close enough for dinner, she said. Not close enough for supervision. He nodded. That's not mileage either. It's accurate. Under the requirements, she drew a line and wrote, things we know we want. The dining table went first. The desk went second. My rocker, Ruth said. You weren't sure. I'm sure I don't want to give it away yet. That counts. The hutch? They both looked toward the den doorway, as though they could see through two walls into the living room. Glenn made a doubtful noise. Heavy. You've hated moving that thing since 1974. I didn't say I hated owning it. You said if your mother hadn't loved it, you would have chopped it into firewood. That was while it was stuck in the basement stairwell. It took 6 men to get it out. 4 men and Daniel. Daniel was 36. He was behaving younger. Ruth left the hutch off the list. They stopped at 5 things, not because they had finished, but because neither could think clearly after that. Glenn folded the page and put it into the center drawer of the desk. Why are you hiding it? Ruth asked. I'm putting it somewhere. Marcy has a key. So? Ruth thought of the label inside the hutch door. So nothing. Glenn reopened the drawer, took out the list, and placed it beneath the desk blotter instead. It was not better hiding. It was the effort that mattered. The telephone rang at 9 the next morning while Ruth was scraping dried oatmeal from Glenn's bowl. Celia Porter, their realtor, had a voice that made every sentence sound as if she were sharing a manageable concern. The photographer's cancellation fee was $75. Celia could postpone the listing agreement, but she wanted to be honest about market timing. Spring might bring more buyers. It might also bring more houses. If you'd like, I can stop by and go over the implications, Celia said. We understand the implications. I'm sure you do. I just know this has been a significant decision. Ruth disliked the careful phrasing. We haven't become confused, Celia. We changed our minds. There was a pause. Of course. Ruth closed her eyes. She had hurt herself and knew she had punished the wrong person. I'm sorry, she said. That was sharp. No apology necessary. It was necessary. I'm simply tired of everyone speaking slowly to me. Celia laughed, surprising her. My mother says the same thing. Then she speaks slowly to me because she thinks I'm making poor choices. Is she right? More often than I prefer. By the end of the call, the listing was suspended rather than canceled. The $75 invoice would arrive by email. Celia promised not to call Marcy, who had been copied on nearly every message since November. Ruth had not realized that needed to be said until she said it. Marcy came by that afternoon. She rang the bell. It was a single ordinary chime, but Ruth stood still in the living room and listened to it fade. Then she opened the door. Marcy held the hawthorn binder against her chest. Her expression was composed, and there was no tape visible anywhere on her person. I brought your floor plans back. I didn't know you had them. You gave them to me. I gave them to you to make a copy. Marcy extended the binder. Then here. Ruth took it. Do you want to come in? I don't know. Do I? That's usually why people ask. Marcy stepped inside and wiped her shoes twice on the mat. Her gaze moved immediately to the hutch. The clean rectangle where her label had been was still visible on the door. I told Lynn she shouldn't have measured for it, Marcy said. You told me she already had. She measured a wall. She didn't send out invitations. Did she want the hutch? She likes it. That's not what I asked. Marcy removed her coat, but kept it folded over one arm. We talked about it. I said you couldn't take everything. She said if you were giving it away, we could use it. Giving it away to you. That is generally how giving works. Ruth put the binder on the hall table. It contained photographs of Hawthorne Court, brochures, copies of estimates, lists in Marcy's small square handwriting. A red divider said disposition. Did you make a list of our furniture? It was for planning. Can I see it? Marcy hesitated, then opened the binder to the red section. Ruth read the first page. Dining hutch, Marcy/Lynn. Roll-top desk, Daniel. Master bedroom set, Marcy. Guest room, patio, split/cell. Sewing chair, donate. Kitchen table, discard. Brass lamps, 1, Marcy, 1 consignment. There were question marks beside the silverware, Glenn's record collection, and a wooden chest Ruth kept at the foot of the guest bed. You did all this before Sunday. Some of it. Before we delayed the move. Yes. Ruth turned another page. Were you ever going to show us? Of course. When? When we started sorting. No. Sunday was when you started labeling. Sorting requires asking. Marcy exhaled through her nose. Mom, you asked me to coordinate a move. That includes making decisions. It includes helping us make decisions. You don't make them. We made a fairly large one Friday. That's my point. You made it at the last possible second, after contracts were signed and everyone had rearranged their lives. Everyone? Me. The word came out harder than Marcy seemed to intend. Ruth closed the binder. Marcy looked toward the kitchen. Is Dad home? He went to buy a furnace filter. Alone? He didn't require a team. I meant because of his knee. He took his cane. Marcy sat on the edge of the sofa, still holding her coat. I don't know what you want from me. I want you to stop assuming that helping gives you a vote. That's easy for you to say. Why? Because you've never had to watch you. Ruth stared at her. Marcy's eyes filled, though her voice remained level. You don't see Dad holding the railing when he thinks nobody is looking. You don't see your car drifting toward the line because you're trying to read a street sign. You don't hear you both say you're fine every single time somebody asks. We are fine. You canceled a move because the kitchen felt small. We canceled a move because it was wrong. And what if every place feels wrong? What if spring comes and Dad falls in the garage? What if you keep waiting until the decision gets made by something worse? There it was, not greed, not entirely. Fear wearing a name tag and carrying a binder. Ruth sat in the chair across from her. Then, tell me you're afraid, she said. Don't put your name on my furniture. Marcy looked down at the coat in her lap. I am afraid. So are we. You don't act like it. That's because we've had more practice. For a while they listened to the furnace run. Marcy picked a loose thread from her sleeve. Lynn thinks I overstepped, she said. I'm beginning to appreciate Lynn. She also still wants the hutch. There goes our friendship. Marcy laughed once, then covered it with a cough. Ruth opened the binder again and removed the pages behind the red divider. She held them out. Take these. Marcy did not reach for them. Why? Because this is not the plan anymore. You'll need an inventory eventually. We'll make our own. You don't know how much half this stuff is worth. Neither do you. I looked up some of it. Ruth glanced toward the den. Did Daniel ask you to? Marcy's silence answered. How much does he think the desk is worth? Not as much as he thinks. Did he ask about anything besides the desk? He wanted pictures of Dad's tools and the patio set. He said he could check resale prices. Did you send them? Not the tools, the patio set. Marcy studied the red pages. Marcy. I sent one picture. It was covered in snow. You could barely see it. Ruth stood and walked to the front window. The patio was behind the house, invisible from there, but she pictured Daniel enlarging the photograph, estimating what could be cleaned, repaired, sold. He said he was trying to help with the deposit you lost, Marcy said. Did he offer us the money? No. Then whose deposit was he repairing? That isn't fair. It's a question. The front door opened. Glenn entered carrying a furnace filter under one arm and a white pharmacy bag in his hand. He stopped when he saw them. You rang the bell? He said to Marcy. I did. Everything all right? No, Marcy and Ruth said together. Glenn nodded. Good. I hate missing developments. Marcy finally took the inventory pages. She folded them once, making the red heading disappear. I won't label anything else, she said. And I'll tell Daniel not to. Tell him nothing leaves this house unless your father and I both agree. He's going to say Dad already agreed about the desk. Then tell him agreement can change when the conditions change. Glenn lowered the furnace filter. That sounds ominously aimed at me. It's aimed at all of us, Ruth said. Marcy put on her coat. Before leaving, she set her house key on the hall table beside the hawthorn binder. Ruth had not asked for it. I made a copy for Lynn, Marcy said. I'll get that one too. The shame on her face kept the gesture from feeling like victory. After she left, Glenn picked up the key. Are we collecting these now? I don't know. He placed it back on the table. Ruth opened the binder to the empty red section. The plastic divider remained, bright and official, with nothing behind it. In the den, beneath the blotter, their own unfinished list waited. Celia suspended the listing, Ruth said. Glenn leaned the furnace filter against the wall. How much did the photographer cost us? 75. He winced. We can survive it, I know. And we need to start looking. I know that too. She took out her phone and searched for one-story homes. Hundreds appeared, each photographed in merciful light. Every countertop bare, every room emptied of the people who had made decisions inside it. Glenn came to stand beside her. Put in 2 bathrooms, he said. Ruth adjusted the search. And a garage, I did. And maybe don't set the distance from Marcy yet. Ruth looked at the key on the table, then at the empty red divider. All right, she said, not yet. The search map filled with red dots until central Ohio looked as if it had developed a rash. Ruth enlarged the area around Columbus. Half the dots disappeared when she selected 1 floor. More vanished when she added 2 bathrooms. Adding a garage reduced the results to 12, 3 of which were new construction priced by people with a religious faith in quartz countertops. Glenn tapped a listing west of the city, that one. It's 32 miles away. It has a workshop. It has a shed. It has electricity. So does the refrigerator. You don't call that a workshop. He enlarged the photograph. The shed stood behind a low brick house on nearly half an acre. The listing called the property peaceful. Ruth had learned that peaceful sometimes meant no grocery store within 15 miles, and no one to hear you fall off the porch. The kitchen has a window over the sink, Glenn said, facing north. You wanted morning light. Morning generally arrives in the east. Maybe it's an optimistic window. The price was lower than they expected. The taxes were reasonable. The listing had been active for 87 days, which made Ruth suspicious and Glenn hopeful. Celia arranged a showing for Wednesday and arrived without Marcy. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to pick her up, Celia said, as Ruth climbed into the back of her car. We didn't, Ruth replied. Glenn took the front seat because folding his knee into the back had become a production involving muttered curses and the removal of 1 shoe. Ruth sat behind Celia, where she could see the small cardboard air freshener hanging from the mirror. It smelled aggressively of something called alpine morning. The farther they drove, the fewer sidewalks Ruth saw. Shopping centers gave way to bare fields and clusters of houses separated by long stretches of 2-lane road. Glenn watched the scenery with interest. Look at that barn, he said. It's falling over, still standing. That is a generous interpretation of both words. Celia glanced at them in the mirror. The house is about 20 minutes from downtown London. London, Ohio, Ruth said. Correct. I don't want Glenn telling people we moved to London and letting them imagine England. I would never lie like that, Glenn said. I'd mention the shed. The house sat at the end of a gravel lane. It was smaller than it appeared in the photographs, but most houses were. The brick had been painted cream, and one shutter hung slightly lower than the other. A wire fence divided the yard from an empty field. Inside, the room smelled of lemon cleaner and cold air. Celia turned on lights as they moved. The living room had a wide eastern window. The kitchen had enough space for 2 people, though the dishwasher door struck one cabinet when opened fully. Glenn tested it twice. You could shave half an inch off the cabinet trim, he said. Or we could continue looking for a dishwasher that opens, Ruth said. The primary bedroom had a bathroom with grab bars already installed. The second bathroom contained a tub the color of canned salmon. Ruth stood in the doorway while Celia praised its condition. It's very clean, Celia said. It looks cooked, Ruth replied. Glenn laughed from the hall. The dining area would hold their table if they removed both leaves. There was no obvious place for the hutch. Ruth tried to decide whether that mattered. Every answer felt contaminated by Marcy's blue label. The shed was better than the house. Glenn stepped inside and became 8 years younger. It had a concrete floor, a built-in bench, good overhead lights, and shelves deep enough for his tool cases. He ran his palm over the bench. Somebody knew what they were doing. Can it be heated? Ruth asked. Space heater. There's daylight around the door. I can weather strip it. You said you wanted less upkeep. That's not upkeep. That's weather stripping. What happens if you need the bathroom? I walked to the house. Across ice? I would avoid the ice. Why didn't I think of that? Celia withdrew to inspect the fence. Glenn looked out through the shed window. Beyond the yard, there was only the flat brown field, the road too distant to see. It's quiet, he said. Yes. You could read. I can read now. Without Daniel driving over the lawn. Ruth leaned against the workbench. You like the shed. I do. You don't like the house. I didn't say that. You inspected the dishwasher as if you were preparing a lawsuit. It can be fixed. The bathtub looks like lunch meat. We wouldn't have to eat it. She waited. Glenn picked at a dried line of glue on the bench. The workshop is 38 minutes from here, she said. 29 without traffic. You timed it? I looked. And Inez is 44 minutes away. You timed her too? I looked. He nodded. A truck passed on the distant road, visible for 3 seconds through a gap in the trees. If you want this house, Ruth said, say so. What about you? I asked first. That's how we ended up at Hawthorne. The sentence stopped her. Glenn turned from the window. You asked if I wanted the condo. I said I thought you did. You decided that meant I didn't. Now you're asking if I want this place so you can decide what you think afterward. I'm trying not to make another mistake. So am I. They stood in the bright, cold shed, each waiting for the other to risk being difficult. I don't want to live here, Ruth said. Glenn released a breath. Neither do I. Then why are we discussing weather stripping? Because it's a terrific shed. She put her hand on the workbench beside his. You may mourn it briefly. On the drive home, they stopped at a diner in London. Glenn ordered meatloaf, and Ruth ordered soup that arrived with a skin on top. They told Celia they would keep looking. No one suggested they reconsider. Daniel's pickup was in their driveway when they returned. He had parked over the rut he had made on Sunday, as if concealing evidence. Ruth opened the front door and heard movement in the garage. Daniel, out here. He was standing beside Glenn's workbench with his phone held over an open tool drawer. Several screwdrivers lay in a row on a folded shop towel. The patio chairs, brought inside for winter, had been pulled away from the wall. What are you doing? Ruth asked. Daniel lowered the phone. Checking model numbers. You used your key. I knocked. We weren't home, I noticed. Glenn entered behind her and looked at the screwdrivers. Those don't have model numbers. I was taking a picture of the set. They're not a set. They look like a set. One's Phillips. Daniel waited. Glenn pointed. The blue one. I know what Phillips means, Dad. You called them a set. Ruth stepped into the garage. The air smelled of oil, sawdust, and the rubber floor mats Glenn stacked beside the mower. Marcy told you nothing was leaving, she said. Nothing is leaving. You're photographing it. That isn't the same thing. Why? To get values. If you're going to lose money changing plans, you should know what you can sell. We will decide what we can sell. I'm helping you decide. No, you're deciding what looks sellable. Daniel's eyes moved to Glenn. Are you okay with this? Glenn closed the tool drawer. She's right. About which part? That you should have asked. I did ask. Marcy said no because Mom was upset. You asked Marcy, Ruth said. She was coordinating. She isn't anymore. Daniel put his phone into his jacket pocket. So, Marcy gets tired of the job, and I'm the last person anybody tells. She didn't get tired, Ruth said. We fired her. Glenn gave Ruth a sideways glance. We adjusted her role. We fired her. Daniel laughed. That's great. Who's going to do all this then? We are. He looked around the garage. Dad can barely get those chairs down. I got them up, Glenn said. Last fall. My strength hasn't expired since October. You complained about your shoulder for 2 weeks because it hurt. That's what I'm saying. Ruth could see concern in Daniel's face, but it came packaged with impatience, making it hard to accept. He had always been most generous when generosity let him finish quickly. Glenn picked up the blue-handled screwdriver and returned it to the drawer. Daniel, the desk is not settled. Daniel's expression emptied. I figured that was coming. We're not saying you won't get it. You're saying Marcy complained, so now you have to make everything equal. This has nothing to do with Marcy. It always has something to do with Marcy. Ruth leaned against the doorframe. She isn't getting the hutch. Not now. Give her a week. She returned her key. Daniel glanced at the hook beside the garage door. His key ring made a small sound as he shifted his weight. Was that her idea? Yes, Ruth said. Did you ask for mine? No. Good. The answer was too quick. Ruth felt the moment close before she could decide whether to stop it. Daniel walked past her into the kitchen. Glenn followed more slowly. At the sink, Daniel turned and rested both hands on the counter. I don't want to sell the desk. Ruth had not accused him aloud, but he had heard it anyway. I want it because it was Grandpa's, he continued. It was always going to come to me. According to whom? Ruth asked. Dad. I said, Probably, Glenn replied. You used to let me sit there when you paid bills. Glenn's face softened. Daniel saw it and hated that Ruth saw him see it. I'm not trying to pick through your estate, he said. I thought there were certain things we all understood. That is the problem, Ruth said. We don't. He looked at his father. Do you even want it? Glenn took his time. I don't know yet. Daniel nodded as if this confirmed something disappointing about him. Then call me when you do. At the front door, Ruth almost asked for his key. The question reached the back of her teeth and stayed there. Daniel kissed her cheek, brief and automatic, then left. His truck backed out without touching the lawn. Glenn returned to the garage and put the patio chairs against the wall. Ruth watched him line up the screwdrivers in no order she could understand. We should have asked for the key, she said. Probably. Do you want to call him? Glenn closed the drawer. Not tonight. Ruth looked at the empty hook where Marcy's key had once hung. One returned key sat on the hall table. Another existed somewhere in Lynn's possession. Daniel's had just driven away. The house had not changed, but its doors suddenly felt less solid. Not tonight, she agreed. Ruth checked the deadbolt before bed, then felt foolish and checked it again. Glenn was already beneath the covers, reading a mystery novel with the book propped against his stomach. Her side of the footboard still showed a faint rectangle where Marcy's label had been. Did you lock the garage door? She asked. Yes. The inside one? Yes. You're sure? He lowered the book. Do you think Daniel is coming back for the screwdrivers? I think we don't know what he thinks belongs to him. He wouldn't take anything. He came in when we weren't home. He took pictures. That is not the defense you think it is. Glenn put the book face down on his chest. I'll ask for the key. When? Soon? Is that before or after eventually? I don't know. They're close together on my calendar. Ruth turned off her lamp. You make jokes when you don't want to do something. I make jokes when you want me to do something at 11:15 at night. It was 10:40. Then I'm aging faster than we thought. She lay on her back in the dark. The furnace started, sending a light metallic rattle through the vent. I don't think he'd steal from us, she said. Neither do I. That isn't what bothers me, I know. Daniel believed he was allowed. That was worse than imagining him sneaking through the garage with a pillowcase of tools. A thief recognized a boundary, even while crossing it. Daniel had looked genuinely insulted that one existed. Glenn found her hand beneath the blanket. I'll call him, he said. In the morning, he did not. Instead, he went to the community workshop for his regular Thursday session. Ruth drove because the sky had darkened before breakfast, and Glenn disliked driving in weather that required headlights. He claimed he needed to pick up a clamp. She suspected he needed to stand somewhere Daniel had not inventoried. The workshop occupied the back half of a former elementary school maintenance building, though no school had used it in decades. It smelled of cut wood, hot dust, and the bitter coffee brewed by men who believed strength was a flavor. Theo Barnes was leaning over a cabinet door when they entered. He had safety glasses pushed onto his head and a green sweater covered in pale curls of wood. Mr. Mercer, he called, settle something. Is this Walnut, or is Pete lying to me again? Pete lies for recreation, Glenn said. But that's Walnut. Theo nodded to Ruth. Mrs. Mercer. Theo. He had called them Mr. and Mrs. Mercer since Glenn first helped him repair a broken chair 3 years earlier. Ruth had told him more than once to use their first names. He always agreed, then forgot on purpose. Glenn crossed the room with his cane under one arm. You sanded across the grain. I did not. You did. I followed the grain's general intention. Wood doesn't have intentions. Ruth leaned against a work table while they argued. Glenn set aside the cane without noticing and bent close to the cabinet. His knee was still bad. His shoulder still hurt when he reached too far. None of that disappeared. But the caution Marcy watched for was not the only thing true about him. Theo looked at Ruth over Glenn's shoulder. He told me you almost moved to Hawthorne. We escaped. That bad? The dishwasher required traffic control. Good reason. Glenn traced the cabinet's edge. We looked at a place near London. England? That's what I said, Ruth told him. Glenn pointed at her. She's the one spreading misinformation. Theo's smile faded when Glenn described the shed. You wouldn't come out here anymore, he said. I could. An hour each way? 38 minutes. With no traffic, Ruth added. Theo picked up a piece of sandpaper. I'm not driving to London every time I glue something backward. You glued it upside down, Glenn said. I need frequent supervision. The joke passed, but Ruth saw Glenn glance around the room. His work apron hung from a peg. A half-restored cabinet waited near the window. Two men at the far bench raised their coffee mugs when they caught him looking. On the drive home, Glenn placed the clamp between his feet and said nothing until Ruth turned onto their street. Put the workshop on the list, he said. It's already there. No. Put near the workshop. That seems implied. Write it anyway. At home, an envelope lay beneath the storm door. Inside was Lynn's copied key and a note in Marcy's handwriting, as promised. Ruth set both keys in the small blue dish on the hall table. She did not call to thank Marcy. Returning access that should not have been duplicated did not require flowers. Glenn called Daniel after lunch. He sat at the kitchen table with the phone on speaker because the button had been pressed accidentally, and neither man knew how to change it without disconnecting. I need you to bring your house key back, Glenn said. There was a pause filled with faint office noise. Why? We're gathering the extras. In case what? In case we decide to change the locks. Ruth looked at Glenn. That part had not been discussed. Daniel heard it too. You're changing the locks? Maybe. Because I took some pictures? Because you came in without permission. I knocked. That isn't permission. Another pause. What if there's an emergency? Daniel asked. We'll give Inez a key. The silence sharpened. You'd give a neighbor a key, but not your own son. She's 3 streets away. I'm 20 minutes. You're 35 minutes from your office. So this is punishment. It isn't punishment. It sure feels like it from this end. Glenn rubbed his forehead. Ruth resisted rescuing him. He had made this call. He could remain inside it. Bring it Sunday, he said. I don't know if I'm coming Sunday. Then mail it. Daniel laughed once. Unbelievable. The call ended. Glenn stared at the telephone. That went well. You said we might change the locks. It came to me. Do you mean it? I'm considering meaning it. Ruth covered his hand with hers. Daniel did not come to Sunday dinner. Marcy sent a message saying she and Lynn had plans. Ruth had already bought a small roast, so she cooked it anyway. She and Glenn ate at the scarred table with both leaves in, sitting at opposite ends like monarchs of a very modest country. This is ridiculous, Glenn said, carrying his plate to the chair beside hers. The roast or the seating? The children. The roast is dry too. It's not dry. It absorbed gravy and remained thirsty. They ate enough to be polite to the animal. Ruth packed the rest into containers neither of them would open until it had become unsafe. Afterward, she found Glenn in the den at the roll-top desk. He was running his fingers along a shallow groove in the writing surface. Daniel did this, he said. With what? Compass point, I think. He was trying to draw a perfect circle. How old? Old enough to know better. Ruth stood behind him. The groove was barely visible unless the light caught it. You never repaired it. Couldn't without refinishing the whole top. You could have made him pay for it. With what money? He had a job. He lasted 3 days. She remembered then. A summer position washing dishes. Daniel coming home furious because the manager had told him to redo a rack of glasses. Glenn had made him return the apron in person. Daniel had sulked for a week. I don't know if he remembers making that, Ruth said. I do. Does that make you want him to have it? Glenn rested his palm over the mark. It makes me understand why he wants it. That wasn't my question. No. The answer did not come. A listing appeared that evening for a 1-story townhouse less than 20 minutes from the workshop. The kitchen had morning light. The garage would hold a workbench if they parked only 1 car inside. The price was possible, but uncomfortable, and the monthly association fee made Glenn produce a noise like a screen door opening. What do we get for that? He asked. Snow removal, lawn care, exterior maintenance. I can remove snow. With Watney, the fancy one. They scheduled a tour for Friday. The doorbell rang Friday morning while Ruth was brushing her teeth. She looked out the bedroom window and saw a white pickup in the driveway. 2 men stood on the porch. One wore a knit cap. The other held a bundle of moving blankets. Glenn opened the door before she reached the hall. Morning, the man in the cap said. We're here for the bedroom set. Ruth stopped behind Glenn. What bedroom set? He asked. Walnut, queen bed, 2 dressers, nightstands. The man checked his phone. Marcy said it's in the main bedroom. Ruth could hear the bathroom faucet still running. There's been a mistake, she said. The man turned the screen toward her. The message included their address, a photograph of the bed, and instructions to arrive before 11 because the Mercers had an appointment in the afternoon. Marcy gave it to my sister, he explained. We borrowed the truck, so if today doesn't work, we've got a problem. It doesn't work, Ruth said. The second man shifted the blankets from one arm to the other. She said it was cleared. We slept in it last night. No one had a useful answer to that. Glenn reached for the door, but headlights swept across the front window. Marcy's car pulled in behind the pickup. She hurried up the walk without fastening her coat. What happened? She asked. I thought they'd be finished. Ruth looked at her daughter. Finished doing what? Marcy stopped on the step. I arranged this before you changed the move. They took off work. The truck is rented. I thought since you weren't taking the set anyway, you thought wrong. Mom, they're already here. So are we. The man in the cap looked toward his truck. We can come back another day. No, Ruth said. You cannot. Marcy lowered her voice. Can we talk inside? You sent people to remove our bed. I was going to tell you. When? After they carried Glenn out on it? Don't do that. Do what? Make me sound monstrous because I forgot to cancel a pickup. Did you forget? Marcy's eyes flicked toward the men. That was the answer. Glenn stepped forward. His shoulder touched Ruth's. The bed stays, he said. Marcy stared at him. Dad, the bed stays? You said yourself it wouldn't fit at Hawthorne. We don't live at Hawthorne. The men retreated toward the pickup. Marcy remained on the porch, exposed by their good sense. You have made me look like a liar, she said. Ruth gripped the edge of the door. You gave away a bed that still had our sheets on it. I was trying to keep a commitment. So are we. What commitment? Glenn put his hand over Ruth's on the door. To each other, he said, and closed it. Through the window, Ruth watched Marcy stand alone for several seconds before turning toward her car. Glenn waited until both vehicles had left the driveway. Then he picked up the keys from the blue dish and placed them in his pocket. Call a locksmith, he said. The locksmith could come between noon and 4, which meant he arrived at 3:52. By then, Ruth had stripped the bed, washed the sheets, dried them, and put them back on. It was an unnecessary amount of work performed with great determination. Glenn stayed in the den, where the sound of his book pages turning at regular intervals suggested he was not reading any of them. The locksmith was a broad man named Curtis, who wore gray fabric covers over his boots. He examined the front lock, the garage entry, and the back door. You want everything on one key? He asked. Yes, Ruth said. Glenn said. Probably. Curtis looked between them. One key, Glenn decided. How many copies? 3, Ruth said. Curtis wrote it down. Who gets the third? Inez. He did not ask who Inez was. Ruth appreciated him immediately. While he worked, Ruth found Marcy's message waiting on her phone. I cannot believe Dad shut the door in my face. Ruth read it to Glenn. I did, he said. She seems certain. I remember the event. Another message appeared. Renee is 46 years old, newly separated, and sleeping on an air mattress. I was trying to help someone who needed the furniture. Ruth sat beside Glenn on the sofa. Who is Renee? Lynn's friend, I think. Did you know about her? No. The moving blankets, the borrowed truck, the 2 uncomfortable men on the porch rearranged themselves in Ruth's mind. The attempted removal did not become acceptable. It became less simple, which was often more inconvenient. She typed, Renee may need a bed. We still need ours. Marcy answered almost immediately. You weren't taking it with you? Ruth wrote, We have not chosen where we are going. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, and returned. You could have said no without humiliating me. Ruth held the phone out to Glenn. What do you think? He read the exchange. I think she wants us to apologize for her bad decision. Do you think we humiliated her? She arrived expecting our bed to be gone. That isn't what I asked. Glenn handed the phone back. I think the whole thing was humiliating. For her? For everybody. Curtis knocked from the hall. I need one of you to test this. Ruth went to the front door. The new deadbolt turned smoothly, without the little upward lift required by the old one. Nice lock, Glenn said behind her. It locks, Curtis replied. That's most of the charm. He gave Ruth 3 bright keys on separate metal rings. The old locks and cylinders lay in a cardboard box at his feet. Want these? No, Ruth said. Glenn glanced into the box. Could use the brass. Ruth looked at him. Never mind. The bill was $412. Ruth wrote the check at the kitchen table. $75 for the photographer, part of the Hawthorne deposit. $412 for locks they had not needed, until their children decided helpfulness included access. The numbers offended her in different ways, but they all came from the same account. Curtis left at 4:27. Their townhouse showing had been rescheduled for 5. We can cancel, Glenn said. And pay Celia another $75 for standing near a camera? That isn't how it works. I know. Get your coat. The townhouse sat in a development called Maple Run, although Ruth saw neither a maple nor anywhere to run. Identical units curved around a central pond with a fountain that had been turned off for winter. The lawns were brown but beautifully uniform. Celia waited beside the garage, rubbing her gloved hands together. I was about to call, she said. Everything all right? Define everything, Ruth replied. Glenn gave Celia the condensed version while she unlocked the door. He left out Renee and the air mattress. Ruth was glad. The story already had too many people trying to determine whether taking the bed was understandable. The entry opened into a living room with high ceilings and tall east-facing windows. Late sunlight lay across the hardwood in long gold rectangles. Oh, Ruth said. Glenn heard it. The kitchen had a broad counter, a pantry, and a dishwasher that opened without endangering anyone. A dining area connected the kitchen to the living room. Ruth paced it while Glenn held out the tape measure. The table fits, he said. With both leaves, 1 leaf comfortably. 2, if we serve thin people. The primary bedroom was smaller than theirs, but large enough for the bed Marcy had attempted to donate. The second bedroom overlooked the pond. There were 2 bathrooms, neither the color of processed meat. Glenn inspected the garage. 1 car could fit beside a narrow workbench. 2 cars could fit if the workbench went away. We could sell mine, Ruth said. You like your car. I like not maintaining 2. You drive yours. I can drive yours. You hate mine. I hate the radio. You set the stations. I set them wrong. Celia opened a utility closet and explained that exterior maintenance, lawn care, roof replacement, and snow removal were included in the association fee. Glenn's face remained neutral until she named the amount. Per year? He asked. Per month? I was making a joke. I hope so. They returned to the living room. Ruth stood in the fading light and pictured her rocker near the window. The hutch would not fit without crowding the room, but the loss felt survivable. Inez could visit without climbing steps. The workshop was 18 minutes away. Marcy was 22 minutes in the opposite direction. It met nearly everything on their list. Then Celia handed them the printed figures. The price was $28,000 higher than the online estimate suggested, because the owner had added new flooring and expected reimbursement for every plank. The association had approved an increase beginning in July. Property taxes were higher than those on their current house, despite the smaller lot. We can afford it, Glenn said. They were in the car when he said it. Celia had gone inside to turn off lights. Ruth studied the figures under the dome lamp. We can buy it, that's what afford means. No. We can buy it if our house sells near the top of Celia's range. Then we can pay the monthly fee if we don't travel, if neither car needs replacing, and if prescriptions never go up. We don't travel now, I know. Do you want to? I'd like the option to disappoint myself. Glenn looked through the windshield at the dark pond. We'd have less maintenance. We'd have less money. That's generally the exchange. What if the fee goes up again? What if the roof at home goes? Then we replace a roof we own. The association roof would also be ours, shared with 36 people who think fountains are necessary. The fountain chose that moment to cough. 1 weak arc of water rose in the center of the pond and collapsed. Glenn laughed. They're getting their money's worth. Ruth folded the figures. You like it. So do you. I asked you. Yes, I like it. Enough to be worried every month? No. The answer came without his usual padding. Ruth looked through the living room window. Celia crossed the empty space, turning off 1 lamp and then another. The golden room disappeared. No, Ruth agreed. They told Celia they would not make an offer. At home, the new lock resisted Ruth because she tried to lift the handle from habit. Glenn took the key, turned it normally, and opened the door. Already paying off, he said. In the kitchen, Ruth took out the household ledger. She had kept one since the year they married, first on paper, and later on a computer Daniel had insisted she buy. The paper ledger remained because a machine could not be trusted to remember where money went. She entered the locksmith under home maintenance, then crossed it out. "What category is it?" Glenn asked. "Family relations? Do we have a budget for that?" "Apparently not." She wrote security. Glenn warmed the leftover roast while Ruth calculated the cost of Maple Run across 10 years. The association alone would consume enough to replace the roof at their current house twice, assuming roofs remained courteous enough to fail one at a time. "What if we sold more furniture?" Glenn asked. "Do you mean the furniture or the tools?" He leaned against the counter. "Either. You wanted a garage for the tools. I don't need all of them." "Which don't you need?" "I don't know." "Then don't use them to make imaginary money." He stirred the gravy. "You like that place?" "I did." "You could have said yes." "So could you." "I thought you wanted me to be honest." "I do. You sound disappointed. I wanted honesty to be less expensive." He smiled and set the spoon down. Ruth's phone rang. Marcy's name appeared. She answered. "Did you change the locks?" Marcy asked without greeting. "Yes." "How did you manage that before dinner?" "We called a locksmith." "I understand the process, Mom." "Then why did you ask?" Lynn drove past and saw the van. Ruth looked at the clock. "Why was Lynn driving past? She was going to Renee's." "Renee lives near us, 4 blocks." Ruth pictured a woman sleeping on an air mattress 4 blocks away, while their intact bedroom set remained assembled. Guilt arrived, but it did not arrive alone. "We didn't change the locks because of Renee," she said. "You changed them because of me, because too many people had access to our house. I returned both keys, after arranging to have our furniture removed. I told you I forgot to cancel. You also said you were going to tell us." Marcy was silent. Ruth softened her voice. "Those statements cannot both be true. I knew you'd say no. Then you knew you needed permission. We had already agreed the set wasn't going. We agreed it wouldn't fit at Hawthorne. Hawthorne is over. You don't have to keep reminding me how much work I wasted. Your work was not wasted. The plan changed. Because you changed it, yes." Ruth heard Marcy breathe in. "You say that like decisions don't affect anyone else. They do. But that doesn't make them anyone else's decisions." "I need some space," Marcy said. "All right, please don't call for a few days." Ruth's grip tightened on the telephone. "All right." The call ended gently, which hurt more than if Marcy had slammed it down. Glenn placed a plate in front of Ruth. What did she say? "She needs space. We have 3 bedrooms worth. Don't." "Sorry." They ate at the kitchen table. The split underneath held. After dinner, Ruth walked to Inez's apartment with the 3rd key in her pocket. The air smelled of snow, though none had begun. Inez answered wearing slippers and holding a wooden spoon. "I need you to keep this," Ruth said. Inez looked at the key in her palm. "Am I inheriting the house?" "No." "Good." "The gutter is crooked. It's for emergencies." "Whose?" "Ours." Inez closed her fingers around it. "Then let's agree not to have one." On the walk home, Ruth saw the porch light burning ahead, and Glenn's shadow move behind the curtains. The new key opened the door smoothly this time. Inside, the old brass locks remained in Curtis's box by the hall table. Glenn had saved them after all. Ruth did not object. Some things could be useless and still take a little time to release. Ruth moved the box of old locks into the hall closet, where it joined a broken umbrella and 3 vacuum attachments that fit no vacuum they currently owned. The next afternoon, a padded envelope arrived from Daniel. His house key was inside with no note. Glenn held it between 2 fingers. He paid $4.80 to mail this from 20 minutes away, 35 minutes from his office. Still, he wanted us to know it was an official grievance. Glenn placed the key in the blue dish beside the other 2. "Should I call him?" "Do you want to?" "No." "Then don't call him because silence makes you nervous. I don't like having both of them angry. I don't either. You seem better at it. I practice while you're making jokes." Neither child came for Sunday dinner. Ruth did not cook a roast. She made grilled cheese and tomato soup, using the good cheddar Marcy usually complained was too sharp. Glenn ate 2 sandwiches and dipped the corners into his soup. "This is better than roast," he said. "That's because you didn't have to chew it." Ruth's phone remained beside her plate. It did not ring. On Monday morning, Celia emailed a listing in Worthington, 6 minutes from Marcy's house. The subject line said, "Possible fit, no pressure." The 1-story house had 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a renovated kitchen, and a small attached garage. The price was fair. The taxes were not outrageous. Morning sun came through windows over the kitchen and dining area. At the bottom of Celia's message was a forwarded line Ruth wished she had not seen. Marcy thinks this could solve everyone's concerns. Ruth closed the email. What is it? Glenn asked. A house. Bad? Probably not. Expensive? Not terribly. Haunted? By our daughter? She reopened the photographs and turned the laptop toward him. Glenn liked the garage. Ruth liked the kitchen. They both disliked the gray plastic flooring, though Celia assured them it was durable. They toured it that afternoon. The house stood on a cul-de-sac, lined with mature trees and expensive mailboxes. It was smaller than their ranch, but better arranged. Their dining table would fit. The bedroom set would fit. The sewing rocker could sit beside an east window. Even the walnut hutch had an uninterrupted wall available, which felt less like luck than conspiracy. It checks a lot of boxes, Celia said. Whose boxes? Ruth asked. Celia gave her a careful look. Yours, I hope. Glenn opened the garage door. A cold draft entered beneath the bottom seal. Room for a bench, he said. A small one, Ruth replied. I'm becoming a small man. You are becoming a man with fewer clamps. That is not the same thing. From the front window, Ruth could see a wide sidewalk curving around the cul-de-sac. A grocery store was 4 minutes away. The doctor was 12. Marcy was 6, 7 if there was traffic near the high school, though Ruth refused to let a building full of offstage adolescents affect the plot of her life. She imagined Marcy arriving with soup, Marcy checking the gutters, Marcy asking why Ruth's car had not moved, Marcy calling at 8, then using the emergency key at 8:10. They had changed the locks to keep their daughter out and were considering buying a house close enough for her to notice which lamps were on. Celia walked them through the primary bathroom. The shower has a low threshold. Not 0, but close. Marcy mentioned that, Ruth said. Celia's smile faltered. She sent the listing. I decided it met your criteria. She talked to you? Only by email. She asked for space from us. I don't think this was intended as contact. It reached us. Glenn touched Ruth's elbow. Can we look at the patio? The patio was a square of concrete enclosed by a privacy fence. The nearest roof rose above it. Someone on the other side coughed, then cleared his throat. Ruth lowered her voice. Do you like it? Yes. The answer surprised her. Enough to live here? I could. That isn't the same answer. No. He looked through the sliding door at the clean gray rooms. It's practical, he said. Near everything. 1 floor. We can afford it. And Marcy would be 6 minutes away. That isn't automatically bad. No. You sound like it is. Ruth rubbed her thumb over the ridged edge of the new house key in her pocket. If we move here now, every time she comes over, part of me will think she won. Won what? I don't know. That seems like a poor reason to reject a house. It is. Do you want to reject it? She looked at the low shower threshold, the broad kitchen counter, the dining wall waiting for a hutch she had not decided to keep. Yes. Because of Marcy? Because I don't want our next life arranged around proving she was right. Glenn considered that. What if she is right about some things? She is. That's what makes her exhausting. He smiled. Ruth took his arm. Would you still choose this place if it were 6 minutes from Daniel instead? God, no. She laughed loudly enough that the unseen neighbor stopped coughing. They told Celia the house was not for them. This time, Ruth could tell Celia did not understand. On the drive home, Glenn said, We can't reject every place because it has something wrong with it. I know. The first one was too far. Maple Run cost too much. This one was too close. I know. What distance is correct? I don't know. Maybe we should add a circle to the map. A circle centered where? He did not answer. Their current house sat near Ruth's grocery store, her library, Inez's apartment, and the workshop. It was 14 minutes from the doctor if the lights cooperated. The Maple Run townhouse had come close, but its fees would have made every future decision feel expensive. They were searching outward while nearly everything they wanted remained around them. Only the house itself had become too much. That realization did not produce a solution. It produced 4 days of cleaning. Ruth emptied the guest room closet while Glenn sorted a cabinet in the garage. They agreed to begin with objects neither child had labeled, as if unlabeled things were emotionally neutral. The first box held table linens that had belonged to Ruth's mother. Some were yellowed, Several had tiny rust marks where straight pins had held them in place. Glenn lifted a lace runner. "Do we use this?" "No. Do we like it?" "I don't know. Does anybody else want it?" That is no longer one of the first questions. I'm trying to understand the system. There is no system. I suspected. Ruth folded the runner and set it back. In the second box, she found embroidered napkins, a chipped gravy boat, and 6 silver-colored place card holders shaped like swans. She had used the swans once at an anniversary dinner when Daniel had complained that his name was misspelled. "You spelled it Darnielle," Glenn reminded her. The pen slipped. It slipped into an R. He was being difficult. He kept the card. Ruth looked at the little tarnished swans. "Did he?" "For years. It was in his wallet." "How do you know?" "He showed me." That was the trouble with deciding what mattered. Objects had private lives within a family. Ruth knew Daniel had broken the desk. Glenn knew he had kept a misspelled place card. Marcy remembered which bowl appeared at every supper. Lynn liked a hutch Ruth suspected she had never dusted. They made 3 piles. Keep, decide later, and leave this room before we die. The third pile remained empty. By lunch, Ruth had placed 2 stained tablecloths into a donation bag, then removed one. Glenn had discarded a jar of bent screws and retrieved it after remembering 3 were brass. "You are worse than I am," Ruth told him. "Screws have uses, so do tablecloths." "Name one." "Tables." They ate sandwiches surrounded by open boxes. Ruth's phone did not ring. She had begun noticing the absence every hour. Marcy had once called 3 times in a day because she needed Ruth to return a jacket, wait for a plumber, and remember the name of a restaurant they had visited in Cleveland. Ruth had resented each interruption. Now, the uninterrupted hours felt like a hallway with too many closed doors. "Do you think she's all right?" she asked. Glenn did not ask whom she meant. Probably. "She hasn't called. She asked for space. She has never respected space before. That's one way to know she's serious." Ruth put down her sandwich. "I don't want her punished forever. Neither do I. I don't want us punished either." "Then maybe stop using that word." "What word?" "Punished." She looked at him. "We changed the locks," he said. "We said no?" "They're angry. That's a consequence. It doesn't have to be a war, unless we make it one. You sound very wise for a man who saved dead locks." "They're brass." That evening, they sat at the kitchen table with a clean sheet of paper between them. Ruth drew 4 columns. Keep, offer, sell, donate. "No trash?" Glenn asked. "Trash doesn't need discussion." "What about decide later?" "That is how we die in this house." He took the pencil and wrote dining table beneath keep. Ruth added, bedroom set. They looked at each other and laughed, quietly at first, then hard enough that Glenn had to hold his side. When the laughter passed, Ruth wrote suing rocker. Glenn wrote roll top desk, then placed a question mark after it. "You can keep it," she said. "I know. You can give it to Daniel. I know that too. You do not have to decide based on whether he's angry." Glenn set down the pencil. "I don't want him to have it because he demanded it. That is also deciding based on whether he's angry. I'm beginning to dislike this process. We've listed 4 things. 5. The question mark counts." The doorbell rang. Ruth's heart lifted before she could stop it. Inez stood outside holding a paper grocery bag. "I bought 6 cans of tomatoes by accident," she said. "You're receiving 3. Ruth let her in. Inez looked at the columns on the table. Inventory, attempted inventory. She took a can from the bag and used it to hold down one corner of the paper. "My apartment building has a townhouse coming available," she said. "End unit, 1 floor. The owner's sister lived there until last month." Ruth looked at Glenn. "Where?" he asked. "Behind the library, across from the park." The workshop was 9 minutes away. Inez's apartment was close enough that she could arrive carrying tomatoes before they had time to invent an excuse. "How much?" Ruth asked. "I don't know. I only know the kitchen is ugly." "That we can afford," Glenn said. Inez handed Ruth the other cans. For the first time, the possibility of moving did not feel like a retreat toward one of their children or an escape from them. It felt like a place on their own map. Inez refused to describe the kitchen in greater detail. "If I tell you, you won't go," she said. "Orange?" Ruth asked. "Not entirely. Green?" There are several opinions in the room. Glenn leaned forward. "Appliances work?" "The refrigerator hums like it has regrets." "That can be fixed." You say that about everything, Ruth said. Most things can. Inez took the inventory pencil and wrote tomatoes under donate. You're not getting them back, Ruth told her. I brought them here to get rid of them. Then they are gifts. They are canned tomatoes, Ruth. They don't need emotional clarity. The townhouse belonged to a woman named Patricia Bell, whose sister had moved to Arizona after deciding Ohio winters were no longer evidence of good character. Patricia had not yet listed it. She was emptying the last closets and arranging fresh paint before calling a realtor. Celia knew the small association and obtained permission for a private showing. She warned Ruth that private did not mean discounted. The association fee was reasonable because it covered only exterior maintenance, lawn care, and snow removal. Roofs belonged to the owners. So did windows, plumbing, driveways, and any refrigerator, with regrets. That sounds more honest than Maple Run, Glenn said. It sounds like we'll still own problems, Ruth replied. I like owning my own problems. That should be on your headstone. Linden Court was tucked behind the library, where 12 attached homes formed 2 staggered rows, facing a strip of grass and old trees. The townhouses were connected at their garages rather than their living rooms. Ruth approved of that immediately. She did not need to hear a stranger cough through the wall. Inez's apartment building stood across the park, its red brick side visible beyond the bare branches. You could see whether I'm home, Inez said. Then close your curtains, Ruth told her. I don't do anything worth hiding. You sing while you clean. That's worth charging admission. The townhouse had a small covered entrance and a storm door that closed properly. Ruth noticed because their own storm door had required a hip bump since September. Patricia met them inside. She was in her early 60s with silver hair clipped close around her ears and white paint on one sleeve. I've done the living room, she said. The bedrooms need another coat, and Inez has already insulted the kitchen, so we can save time. The living room was plain and bright. 2 east-facing windows looked toward the park. Between them stood a brick fireplace with an electric insert that appeared to have been designed by someone who had never witnessed fire. Does it work? Glenn asked. It lights up and makes noise, Patricia said. Whether that counts is between you and your beliefs. Ruth liked her. The kitchen began with brown cabinets, continued through a yellow laminate counter, and ended with a backsplash of small tiles in cream, orange, and green. Oh, Glenn said. I warned you, Inez replied. The refrigerator hummed from the corner. It sounds lonely, Ruth said. It belonged to my sister's husband, Patricia said. He liked appliances that announced themselves. Where is he? Arizona, complaining about the dry heat. The kitchen was ugly, but it was large enough. The dishwasher opened fully. The sink faced an eastern window with a view of a mature lilac bush. A breakfast area connected to the living room through a broad doorway. Glenn stretched the tape measure across it. The table fits. 1 leaf, Ruth asked. 2 if we move the sideboard. We don't own a sideboard. Then there's no obstacle. The hutch would not fit. There was 1 uninterrupted wall, but placing the hutch there would narrow the walkway to the bedrooms. Ruth imagined Marcy measuring, making a case, finding 3 alternate configurations. She pressed her palm against the yellow counter. Does the hutch fit? Inez asked quietly. No. Are you sad? Ruth considered it. I'm annoyed that I don't know. That's progress. The primary bedroom held the walnut bed, both dressers and the nightstands according to Glenn's measurements. The second bedroom was large enough for a desk and Ruth's sewing supplies, though not both if the desk was the roll top. Could put the desk in the living room, Glenn said. Where? Beside the fake fireplace. It would block the window. 1 window. I requested morning light, not morning slit. They moved on. Both bathrooms had walk-in showers. The smaller one was decorated with wallpaper featuring pale blue geese wearing ribbons. Paint, Glenn said. Fire, Inez suggested. Patricia laughed. My sister will be hurt. Does she have to know? Ruth asked. She has friends here? She'll know before the fumes clear. The garage was narrow but deep. A workbench could fit at the back while leaving room for 1 car. There was a built-in cabinet, a utility sink, and enough electrical outlets for Glenn to touch each one approvingly. The community workshop is 9 minutes, Ruth said. 8, Inez corrected. I drove it this morning. Glenn looked at Ruth. You told her? I told her the list. You told me near the workshop, Inez said. You didn't specify secrecy. The small concrete patio faced south. The neighboring patio was screened by a wooden divider and a row of shrubs. Beyond them, The park's walking path curved toward the library. It was not beautiful. It was not impressive. The bedrooms needed paint, the refrigerator needed replacement, and the kitchen would remain ugly until they could afford to change it. The association allowed only one car in the driveway overnight, which meant selling one of theirs sooner than Ruth had planned. The roof was 14 years old. The furnace was 11. Nothing about it invited fantasy. Ruth could picture living there anyway. She could see her rocker beside the east window, the dining table open for supper, Glenn returning from the workshop before dark. She could walk to the library. Inez could arrive with unwanted groceries. Marcy could visit, but she would have to choose to visit. Daniel could reach them without crossing half the county. The house did not organize their life around either child. How much? Glenn asked. Patricia named a figure 23,000 below Maple Run and above what Ruth had hoped for. The association fee was less than half of Maple Run's. Celia handed them a sheet of estimated costs. Ruth read every line twice. What is the hurry? She asked Patricia. My sister wants her share of the money for a place in Arizona. I want to stop paying utilities on an empty house. Neither of us is desperate, but neither of us enjoys waiting. When would you want to close? 6 weeks. Ruth had planned to revisit moving in the spring. 6 weeks would put them near the beginning of it, with no time for the prolonged consideration she had defended so fiercely. Glenn must have seen the calculation on her face. We can say no, he said. I know. We can also ask for more time. Patricia nodded. You can ask. She did not promise to grant it. On the drive home, Ruth held the cost sheet on her lap. The figures worked if their current house sold within Celia's range. They would have enough left to replace the refrigerator, paint, pay the movers, and preserve most of their savings. If the roof failed early, they would feel it. If their house sold low, they would need to reduce the offer or walk away. It's too fast, Ruth said. Glenn drove because daylight remained. He kept both hands on the wheel. Maybe. We delayed the entire move because we needed time. We needed time to know what we wanted. We've had 2 weeks. We had 53 years before that. That isn't how decisions work. No, but we made a list. The place meets most of it. It has goose wallpaper. Paint meets that. The roof is old. So is ours. The refrigerator sounds haunted. I can put it in the garage and talk to it. She looked at him. What? He asked. Do you want the townhouse? Yes. The answer came cleanly. Ruth turned toward the window. The park disappeared behind them as they joined traffic. Enough to move in 6 weeks? Yes. You're certain? No. You asked if I wanted it. She folded the cost sheet along its existing crease. I want it too, she said. Glenn smiled without looking away from the road. Wanting it did not settle anything. At home, Ruth opened the household ledger, the Hawthorne binder, their bank statements, and Celia's estimate of their home's likely sale price. Glenn cooked eggs for dinner because numbers made him hungry, and Ruth refused to calculate around chewing. They could not buy Linden Court safely without selling the ranch. Patricia would have to accept an offer contingent on that sale. Their own house would need to be listed quickly, which meant completing repairs they had expected to spread across several months. The gutter needed adjustment. The hallway needed paint. A bathroom faucet dripped. The refrigerator clicked wetly every 9 minutes. The photographs would have to be rescheduled. I wonder if the photographer gives repeat customer discounts, Glenn said. Do not make me calculate that. They called Celia after dinner. Celia recommended offering slightly below Patricia's price, requesting an inspection, and making the purchase contingent on selling their home. Patricia could reject it or continue accepting showings. Nothing would be guaranteed. That sounds appropriately uncomfortable, Ruth said. They wrote the offer. Ruth slept badly. Each time the furnace started, she pictured a different future expense. At 2 in the morning, she imagined Patricia accepting another offer. At 3, she imagined their own house refusing to sell. At 4, she imagined moving into Linden Court and discovering that the geese wallpaper could not be removed by any method known to science. Patricia countered the next afternoon. She would reduce the price by $5,000, accept the contingency, and allow 7 weeks instead of 6, provided the Mercers listed their house within 10 days. Ruth read the counteroffer at the kitchen table. That isn't enough time, she said. For what? Glenn asked. She looked around. The hutch still carried its clean rectangle. Open boxes remained in the guest room. The bedroom set had sheets on it again. The garage held 40 years of Glenn's useful and useless objects. Their children were not speaking to them. For everything. It doesn't all have to be finished before we list. It has to look finished in the photographs. That is different. I hate when you're practical. I learned from you. The acceptance deadline was 6 that evening. At 5:43, Ruth signed. Glenn signed beneath her. Celia submitted the papers. Patricia confirmed 10 minutes later. The townhouse was not theirs yet. Their house had not sold. An inspection could reveal trouble. A buyer could fail to appear. The refrigerator at Linden Court could die from loneliness before closing. Still, Ruth walked into the living room and stood before the walnut hutch. "We have to decide," she said. Glenn came beside her. "Not tonight. 10 days to list the house, not empty it." She touched the place where Marcy's label had been. The finish was lighter beneath her fingers. "We should tell them. Both. They'll hear eventually." Ruth sent the same message to Marcy and Daniel. "We made a contingent offer on a townhouse near the library. It was accepted. We are listing this house in 10 days. Nothing has been assigned or promised, but we wanted you to hear it from us." Daniel responded first. "Does the desk fit?" Ruth handed the phone to Glenn. He read it and put the phone face down. Marcy's reply came several minutes later. "Congratulations! Does the hutch?" The message ended there. Another appeared. "Sorry, wrong question. Is this what you both want?" Ruth read it twice before showing Glenn. "Yes," he said. Ruth typed the answer. "Yes, it is." Marcy sent back a single word. "Good." It was not an apology. It was not reconciliation. It was the first thing their daughter had given them in weeks without trying to arrange what came next. The repairs list covered 2 pages by breakfast. Glenn objected to the wording of several entries. "The porch rail is not loose," he said. "It moves. It has flexibility. So does a diving board. The bolts need tightening." Then, write "tighten bolts." Ruth crossed out "repair porch rail" and wrote, "Prove porch rail is not loose." Glenn pointed at the refrigerator entry. "What does diagnose clicking mean?" "It means find out why it clicks. It's done that for months. I know. Nothing bad has happened. The photographer may record sound. He is taking pictures, Ruth. I don't trust modern equipment." Celia arrived at 10 to walk through the house with them. She moved from room to room carrying a clipboard, touching nothing and noticing everything. The hallway paint needed refreshing. The bathroom faucet needed a new washer. One window in the guest room stuck halfway. The porch rail was loose. Glenn tested it after Celia did, slightly. Celia suggested removing excess furniture before photographs. Not all of it, just enough to make the rooms feel larger. The guest room dresser could remain. The rocker might be better elsewhere. The walnut hutch made the dining room seem narrow. Ruth looked at the hutch. "Where would it go?" she asked. "Storage temporarily? Or a consignment shop, if you decide not to take it?" Marcy wanted it. Celia lowered her clipboard. "Do you want her to have it?" "I don't know. Then storage. Storage would cost money. Moving the hutch twice would cost more." Every undecided object had begun generating expenses. After Celia left, Glenn called Theo. "I need someone to look at a porch rail," he said. Ruth heard Theo's voice through the phone. "Look at it or fix it. Depends what looking reveals." "Mrs. Mercer says it's loose, doesn't she?" Glenn covered the receiver and looked at Ruth. "He's becoming disrespectful. Accurate people often seem that way." Theo arrived after work carrying a socket set and wearing heavy boots. He tightened 2 bolts, replaced a third, then knelt to inspect the lower bracket. "This one's cracked." Glenn crouched beside him until his knee objected. He rose with help from the rail, which shifted under his hand. "Flexible," Ruth said. "I heard you the first time." The repair took 40 minutes. Theo refused money. "You spent 40 minutes, Ruth said. "You've both fed me more than 40 minutes worth of pie. That pie was not payment. Then Mr. Mercer can help me with the cabinet door Saturday." Glenn frowned. "Help means you do the sanding again." "I thought wood didn't have intentions. It has grain. You're changing the rules." Theo put away his tools, leaving the rail solid, and Glenn mildly insulted. At the door, he looked around the living room. "So, this is real?" "If the house sells," Ruth said. "You need help packing the garage?" Glenn answered too quickly. "No." Theo smiled. "I'll ask again when the boxes start winning." Marcy rang the bell that evening. She stood on the porch with a canvas bag containing rollers, brushes, drop cloths, and 2 cans of hallway paint in the correct color. "I kept the receipt," she said. "If you don't want help, I'll return everything." Ruth held the storm door open. Marcy entered but did not remove her coat until Ruth asked whether she intended to paint in it. Lynn said, "I should wait for an invitation. Lynn is having an excellent month. She enjoys your approval from a safe distance." Glenn came from the kitchen and looked inside the bag. "You bought paint." "I asked Celia what needed doing." Ruth stiffened. Marcy saw it. "I asked what I could help with." She said the hallway. "She did not tell me your finances, your offer, your blood pressure, or the location of your silverware." "We keep the silverware in the freezer," Glenn said. Marcy looked at him. "Why?" "To confuse burglars." "He's lying," Ruth said. "I assumed." They spread drop cloths along the hall. Marcy took the roller. Ruth handled the trim because she trusted herself more near baseboards. Glenn was assigned to remove outlet covers and told not to climb anything. For 20 minutes, they talked only about paint. Then Marcy said, "Renee bought a bed." Ruth kept her brush against the edge of the molding. "Good. It's used." "Nice, though. I'm glad." "She isn't angry." Was she? She was embarrassed. So were we. "I know." The roller moved up and down the wall with a soft, sticky sound. "I should have canceled," Marcy said. "I didn't forget." Ruth waited. "I kept thinking if I canceled, it meant all the work was wasted. Not just the truck. Everything. You knew we were sleeping in that bed." "Yes." "Did you think we would get into it that night and discover it gone?" "I thought you'd be mad, then realize it made sense." Ruth dipped her brush. "That has been your theory about most things." Marcy stopped rolling. "I'm sorry. There was no qualification, no explanation attached to the other end." Ruth looked at her daughter. A drop of paint clung to Marcy's hair near her temple. "Thank you," Ruth said. They continued. Glenn appeared with 3 mugs of coffee and no outlet covers removed. "What have you been doing?" Ruth asked. "Supervising. Go supervise the screws." He saluted and left. When the first coat was finished, Marcy stood in the dining room and looked at the hutch. Ruth watched her see the pale rectangle where the label had been. "Lynn doesn't need it," Marcy said. "This was never about what Lynn needed." "I know. I'm trying to say I don't expect it." "Do you still want it?" Marcy placed the roller tray on a folded newspaper. "Yes." The honesty eased something Ruth had not expected. "I still don't know what we're doing with it. You don't have to decide now." Ruth smiled faintly. "That phrase is improving with use." Marcy smiled too. Daniel did not respond when Ruth told him they were painting. He sent Glenn a message the next morning asking whether the desk would fit in Linden Court. Glenn wrote back, "Maybe." Daniel replied, "If not, I can pick it up before showings." Glenn showed Ruth the phone. "What will you say?" she asked. He typed slowly. "Nothing leaves until we finish our own inventory. Please stop asking." Daniel's answer came several hours later. "Got it." Ruth did not believe he had gotten it. She believed he had received it. That was different. The inspection at Linden Court took place under steady rain. The inspector moved through the townhouse with a flashlight, opening panels and testing outlets. Ruth followed until he asked whether she would like to hold the ladder. "No," she said. "I'd like you not to fall off it." He found no catastrophe. The roof would likely need replacement within 5 years. The furnace was old but functioning. Moisture had swollen the cabinet floor beneath the kitchen sink, probably from a leak repaired long ago. 2 windows had failed seals. The refrigerator's hum indicated a worn compressor. "It may run another 2 years," the inspector said, "or it may stop while we're standing here." The refrigerator continued humming, pleased by the attention. Celia helped them estimate the likely costs. Patricia agreed to repair the sink cabinet and reduce the price by another $2,000 for the windows and refrigerator. She would not replace the roof or lower the price further. Glenn stood in the goose-papered bathroom while Ruth read Patricia's response. "We could walk away," he said. "Do you want to?" "No, neither do I. The roof worries me." Everything with a roof will eventually need a roof. That sounds like something I would say. I'm growing. They accepted the inspection terms. Back at the ranch house, preparation accelerated. Glenn replaced the faucet washer, then replaced it again, when the first replacement produced a faster drip. Theo returned to adjust the sticking guest room window. Inez cleaned the kitchen cabinets while criticizing their collection of expired spices. You have cinnamon from 2009, she said. It doesn't spoil, Ruth replied. It has no smell. It's subtle. It's brown dust. Inez threw it away. Ruth retrieved it, smelled it, and threw it away herself. Marcy applied the second coat of paint without being asked twice. She brought Lynn on Saturday to help wash windows. Lynn hugged Ruth at the door, apologized about the hutch without naming it, and spent 3 hours cleaning glass with the focused gratitude of someone glad not to be discussing furniture. Daniel did not come. On the 8th day, the house was ready for photographs. The photographer was a young-looking man named Owen, who asked them to remove family pictures from the mantel, clear the kitchen counters, hide the bathroom wastebasket, and take the magnets off the refrigerator. You want it to look like no one lives here, Ruth said. I want buyers to picture themselves living here. That requires us to disappear first. Owen glanced at Celia. She's kidding, Glenn said. Partly, Ruth added. They carried framed photographs into the guest room closet. Ruth removed the ceramic rooster from the kitchen counter and the stack of mail Glenn had placed beneath it, as if the rooster were filing paperwork. Owen photographed the dining room from 3 angles. The hutch remained, despite Celia's concern. Ruth had decided that paying to store it before she knew its destination was foolish. The room looked narrower, but it looked like their room. When Owen finished, he showed Ruth one image on the back of his camera. Sunlight crossed the dining table. The hutch stood in shadow behind it. Nothing was labeled. Nothing looked claimed. That's nice, Ruth said. It's a good house, Owen replied. The listing went live the following morning. Celia placed a white sign in the yard with her photograph, phone number, and the words, "For sale," in red. Ruth watched from the front window while Glenn stood beside her. Well, he said. Well, the sign was larger than any strip of painter's tape. It announced to strangers that the house was available, that its rooms could be measured and judged, that someone else might place a bed where theirs had stood. Ruth waited for the old anger. It did not come. She and Glenn had chosen this label themselves. That made all the difference. The first showing began at 10 the next morning. At 9:52, Ruth found Glenn in the garage tightening the cap on a bottle of wood glue. We have to leave. I'm leaving. You are organizing glue. It tipped over once. The buyers will survive. They'll think I'm careless. They are going to open our closets. Your reputation is already beyond protection. They drove to Inez's apartment and sat at her kitchen table while strangers walked through their bedroom. Ruth watched the clock. At 10:18, she pictured someone testing the mattress. At 10:23, she imagined a woman opening the hutch and finding the brass latch that did not match. At 10:31, Celia sent a message saying the showing was finished. You can't go back yet, Inez said. You'll look eager. It's our house. Then you're allowed to look eager. The feedback arrived that afternoon. Nice natural light. Dining room feels tight. Garage has too much storage. Buyers concerned about dated primary bath. Too much storage? Glenn said. The garage is storage. They mean your things. My things are stored. The problem appears to be that they can see them. The second showing took place while Ruth and Glenn ate pie at a diner. The third occurred during Glenn's workshop session, forcing Ruth to spend an hour at the library, where she read the same page of a novel 6 times. By the fourth showing, she had stopped imagining theft and begun resenting criticism. One buyer disliked the street, another wanted a larger kitchen. A third praised the hutch in person, and then wrote that it overwhelmed the room. People want character until character occupies square footage, Ruth said. Celia called after 5 days with an offer $22,000 below the asking price. The buyers wanted their closing costs paid and requested the riding mower. We don't own a riding mower, Glenn said. I told them that, Celia replied. Should we buy one so we can refuse? Ruth declined the offer. The house remained listed through a gray week of shoe covers, locked medicine cabinets, and hurried departures. Ruth kept the counters clean enough that making toast felt like vandalism. Glenn began carrying a box around the garage, placing objects in it, then taking them out in a different order. Inez gathered 3 moving estimates at Ruth's request. One company charges by the hour, she said. One charges by weight. The third charges according to a formula developed by people who dislike old furniture. Which is cheapest? Ruth asked. That depends how slowly Glenn walks while holding a lamp. I move briskly with lamps, Glenn said. Theo came twice after work to help box the garage. He labeled one carton, clamps, keep, and another mystery metal, Glenn decides. Ruth noticed Glenn did not object to Theo's labels. They named the contents, not the owner. Daniel noticed too. He arrived on a Thursday evening, rang the bell, and entered only after Ruth opened the door. He carried his returned house key loose in his palm. "This got mailed back to me," he said. Ruth looked at the envelope in his other hand. "You put our address in both places." I was irritated. "The Postal Service is not trained for family disputes." He set the key in the blue dish. "I thought maybe you did it to make a point." We changed the locks. The point had already been made. Glenn called from the garage, and Daniel went to join him. Ruth followed a few minutes later with coffee. Daniel stood beside the labeled cartons, reading them. "So Theo gets to decide what stays." "Theo holds the marker?" Glenn said. "That wasn't my question." "He's helping me sort," I offered. "You came in and photographed things. Because I thought you wanted values." "I didn't." Daniel nudged the mystery metal box with his shoe. "What's in here?" "Mystery metal? Are you selling it?" "I'm deciding." Daniel glanced at Ruth. "Are we allowed to ask about anything yet?" "You're allowed to ask," she said. "You're not allowed to treat the answer as overdue." He picked up a small block plane from the workbench. Its wooden handle was dark with use. "I always liked this." Glenn held out his hand. Daniel returned it. "Put it on the list," Glenn said. "What list?" "The one where we decide what we're taking, selling, offering, or donating." "So, there is a system now?" "Yes." "Can I see it?" "No." Daniel laughed in disbelief. "Why not?" "Because it's ours. You're going to sell things I might want without telling me. If we choose to offer families something, we'll offer it. That hutch belonged to Grandma. And then it belonged to your father," Ruth said. "And me. So Marcy gets it." "Marcy is not getting it." Daniel looked surprised. "You're taking it?" "We haven't decided. You keep saying that like time isn't moving." Glenn rested both hands on the workbench. "The desk is coming with us." Daniel's face changed. Ruth had not known Glenn had decided. She looked at him, but he kept his attention on their son. "It fits in the living room," Glenn continued. "I still use it. You told me it wouldn't fit. At Hawthorne. You know, you could have just said you changed your mind. I am saying it now. After making me ask 6 times, I asked you to stop asking." Daniel looked at the label boxes, then at Theo's neat black writing. "Fine," he said. "Keep it." He left without drinking his coffee. Glenn stared at the block plane he had taken back. "You decided about the desk," Ruth said. "Apparently. Do you want to talk about it?" "No?" "All right." He made it sound like I was keeping it from him instead of keeping it for me. That seems to have helped. Glenn placed the plane in clamps, keep, realized his mistake, and removed it. The second offer came the next day. It was 9,000 below, asking with no request for imaginary equipment. The buyers could close 3 days before Patricia needed to close on Linden Court, leaving just enough time for funds and paperwork to move where they belonged. They requested an inspection and asked that the dining room chandelier remain. "I hate that chandelier," Ruth said. "You chose it," Glenn replied. "In 1992, I have developed." Celia believed the offer was fair. Ruth and Glenn countered 4,000 higher. The buyers split the difference. Ruth signed at the dining table. The chandelier hung above her, preparing to outlive another relationship. The inspection produced a request for a credit toward the aging air conditioner and repairs to a cracked section of driveway. Glenn wanted to argue that the crack had not moved in 15 years. "That may be why they want it repaired," Ruth said. They negotiated the credit down and accepted. For the first time, both sales seemed likely to happen. Celia wrote the dates on the calendar. The moving company Inez preferred reserved the Monday between closings. Ruth paid a deposit that could be refunded only with 7 days' notice. Decisions that had once felt optional became appointments. The hutch stood next. A consignment shop sent a woman named Denise to examine it. She opened every door, checked the dovetail joints, and photographed the mismatched latch. "Good wood," Denise said. "Dark pieces aren't moving quickly right now." "It has moved 6 times, Glenn said. "None quickly." Denise estimated a sale price between $600 and $800, less 40% commission. Pickup would cost $75. Marcy had imagined it as an heirloom. The market considered it large brown furniture. After Denise left, Ruth sat at the dining table with the 4-column list. Hutch remained unwritten. Glenn stood at the window. You could give it to Marcy. I know, she wants it. I know, you don't. That's not true. Do you? Ruth looked at the hutch. She loved the ring left by Glenn's mother's poinsettia pot. She loved the stubborn lower door, the way the shelves fit exactly 12 dinner plates. She hated dusting the carved top. She hated the memory of 6 people lifting it through a basement stairwell. She hated that Marcy's name still seemed visible even after the tape was gone. I don't want to move it again, she said. Then don't. If I give it to Marcy, I'll wonder whether she got it by claiming it. Probably. If I sell it, I'll wonder whether I punished her. Probably. You are not useful. I tightened the latch. Ruth called Marcy. Her daughter arrived that evening without paint, binders, or bags. She sat at the dining table while Ruth explained the consignment estimate. You're selling it, Marcy said. We're considering it. Because it won't fit? Because we don't want to take it. Marcy looked at the hutch. You could give it to us. Yes, but you don't want to. I don't know whether giving it to you would feel like love or surrender. Marcy's eyes narrowed, then softened. That's honest, she said. It isn't kind. It doesn't have to be kind. Ruth waited for argument. None came. Marcy stood and opened the lower door. It stuck halfway. You have to lift as you pull, Ruth said. I know. Together, they emptied the hutch. Marcy wrapped plates in newspaper while Ruth cleaned the shelves. Glenn removed the unmatched brass latch, polished it, and put it back. Inside the top drawer, beneath a stack of linen napkins, Marcy found a strip of blue painter's tape folded onto itself. Her name was visible through one edge. I thought you threw these away, she said. I had them in my pocket. One must have fallen out. Marcy turned the little blue square over. Then she walked to the kitchen and dropped it in the wastebasket. Denise scheduled the pickup for Saturday. Daniel arrived while the consignment crew was carrying the hutch through the front door. He stood on the porch watching 2 men guide it past the rail Theo had repaired. You sold it? He asked. It's going on consignment, Ruth said. You wouldn't give it to Marcy, so you sold it to strangers? Marcy stepped out behind Ruth. They decided not to keep it. I'm talking to Mom, and I'm telling you, I'm fine. Daniel stared at his sister. You wanted that thing for years. Yes. So what changed? Marcy looked at Ruth before answering. It wasn't mine. The crew lifted the hutch into the truck. Daniel's mouth hardened. This family has lost its mind. No, Ruth said. We've stopped pretending every object is a vote. He turned toward Glenn. Are you selling the tools too? Some. Do I get a chance before strangers? You'll get what we choose to offer. What if I need something? Then ask for the thing because you need it, Glenn said. Not because you think it has your name on it. Daniel looked from one parent to the other. I do need something. Ruth felt the shift before he spoke. My car transmission is going, he said. I'm short about $3,000. I was going to ask if you could help until I get my bonus. The old response rose inside Ruth with astonishing speed. How soon? What does the mechanic say? Do you need a ride? Glenn looked at her. Daniel saw that too. We're paying for 2 closings, movers, repairs, and a refrigerator, Ruth said. We're not lending money right now. You're selling a house. We're buying one. You'll clear plenty. That is our retirement. I said lend, and we said no. Daniel shoved his hands into his coat pockets. Right. Boundaries? The word sounded dirty in his mouth. Yes, Ruth said. Boundaries? He walked toward his pickup. It started on the second try and backed out of the driveway. Marcy remained beside Ruth as the consignment truck turned the corner. The dining room looked larger without the hutch. The pale rectangle on the floor and the unfaded patch on the wall showed exactly where it had stood. I can clean that, Marcy said. You don't have to. I know. She fetched a bucket anyway. Ruth knelt beside her, and together they washed the outline their furniture had left behind. The pale rectangle vanished after the second washing, though Ruth could still find it if she stood at the kitchen doorway and looked sideways. The consignment shop sold the hutch 11 days later for $650. After commission and pickup, Ruth and Glenn received $315. Your mother's heirloom is worth 1 locksmith and most of a photographer, Ruth told Glenn. She would have been offended. She was offended by coupons. She believed they showed weakness. The check went into the moving account. The patio set sold for $240 after Daniel's higher estimate failed to attract anyone. They donated the guest room dresser, one brass lamp, 3 boxes of dishes, and enough bedding to make Ruth question why 2 people had owned 14 pillowcases. They kept the bedroom set. Marcy said nothing. She came twice a week now, always ringing the bell. Sometimes she brought Lynn, sometimes she came alone. She asked what needed doing, and when Ruth said nothing, she sat at the dining table and wrapped glasses until something occurred to them. The first time Marcy reached for the marker, she stopped with her hand above it. "What should I write?" "Kitchen," Ruth said. "Which kitchen?" Ruth looked at her. Marcy added, "Current or new?" "New?" She wrote "new kitchen" on the box. It was the sort of question that would have seemed absurd a month earlier. Now it felt like evidence. Daniel remained absent. His car transmission apparently survived without their assistance. He did not answer Ruth's invitation to dinner, but he sent Glenn a short message asking whether they had sold the block plane. Glenn replied, "No." Daniel wrote, "Good." "What does that mean?" Ruth asked. "It means good. Does he want it?" "He said he liked it." "That is not the same thing. I know." Glenn placed the plane in a shallow box with 3 chisels, a mallet, and an old combination square. On the side he wrote, "Offer, Daniel," then crossed out Daniel's name. "You changed your mind?" Ruth asked. "I changed the label." He wrote, "Decide later." The sewing rocker stayed until the final week. Ruth had tried it in 3 imaginary locations at Linden Court. Beside the east window, it blocked part of the fireplace. In the second bedroom, it crowded the desk. In their bedroom, it fit but looked stranded. Inez sat in it one afternoon while Ruth sorted sewing patterns on the floor. "This chair still squeaks," Inez said. "It has always squeaked." "You said Glenn fixed it." "He made it quieter." "That is how he defines fixed." Inez rocked gently. The squeak came at the end of each backward motion. Ruth remembered her sitting there after Glenn's knee operation, when he slept in the bedroom, and Ruth was too frightened to sleep at all. Inez had stayed until 2 in the morning, rocking and talking about everything except hospitals. Later, during a week when Ruth had developed pneumonia, Inez had sat in the same chair and read aloud from a cookbook because it was the only book within reach. "You should take it," Ruth said. Inez stopped rocking. "Where?" "Your apartment." "Why?" "Because you're the only person besides me who uses it. I use it because it's here. Would you use it if it were there?" Inez looked down at the worn wooden arms. "Yes." "Then I want you to have it." "Do you actually want me to have it, or are you running out of imaginary rooms?" "Both can be true." Inez rocked once more. "I won't take it if you'll resent me. I won't. You might visit and stare at it. I stare at your curtains." "You survive. My curtains are excellent. They're too short." "I'll take the chair." Ruth wrote Inez on a card and set it on the seat. She did not attach it. Inez carried the card home in her purse and made Theo help move the rocker the following evening. Watching it leave hurt. It also felt clean. No one had claimed it. No one had earned it by blood or demanded it as proof. Ruth had looked at someone she loved and chosen. The current house closing remained on schedule. The buyers performed a final walkthrough and raised no objections. Patricia's sister signed her papers from Arizona. The refrigerator at Linden Court stopped humming 3 days before closing, saving everyone the trouble of pretending it had years left. Patricia offered to have it removed. "Please," Ruth said, quietly, "so it doesn't know we discussed it." They ordered a modest refrigerator with no screen, no dispenser, and no ability to communicate with a telephone. It would arrive the day after the move. On the final Sunday, the 4-column inventory lay nearly complete. Keep included the dining table, bedroom set, roll-top desk, Ruth's sewing cabinet, 2 lamps, 6 chairs, and more books than any reasonable mover would welcome. Sell had dwindled because selling required photographs, messages, strangers who arrived late, and negotiations over $5. Donate contained nearly everything practical. Offer held the yellow serving bowl, the block plane, a box of records, 2 framed prints, and a set of heavy mixing bowls Ruth had not used since her wrists began objecting. "Are we offering the plane to Daniel?" Ruth asked. Glenn turned it over in his hands. "I don't know. He asked about it. He asked if we sold it. Do you want him to have it? I want him to want something from me that isn't a thing." Ruth closed the marker. "He does. He has an odd method of showing it. So do you." Glenn set the plane down. "I don't know how to call him without making it sound like I'm inviting him to collect. Ask him to help move the desk." That sounds worse. Ask him to help you. Glenn made the call. Daniel answered on the fourth ring. Ruth heard only Glenn's side. The movers are Monday. A pause. Yes, I know you work. Another pause. No, I'm not asking you to take the whole day. Glenn's fingers tightened around the telephone. I need help making sure the desk gets out without damaging the tambour. Ruth watched his face. No, it isn't for you. It's going to Linden Court. A longer pause. I'm asking because you know how it comes apart. Glenn looked down. All right, 9 o'clock. When he hung up, Ruth asked, Is he coming? He said he can stay 2 hours. That's something. It's exactly 2 hours. That is still something. On moving morning, Ruth rose before the alarm and walked through the dark house. Boxes lined the walls. The dining table stood bare except for a roll of blue painter's tape and a black marker. Ruth had bought them herself. She touched the tape. For weeks she had used paper cards and box labels, unwilling to place blue strips on furniture. But the movers needed clear destinations. New house was not enough when each room mattered. Glenn entered wearing work clothes and one shoe. Have you seen my other one? Bedroom. I was in the bedroom. Bathroom. Why would it be there? The mystery will remain after we move. He found it beside the bathroom scale. Together, they began labeling. The bedroom set received new bedroom. The roll-top desk received living room by fireplace. The sewing cabinet said second bedroom. The dining table received our table because Ruth could think of nothing more accurate. A small upholstered chair from the den was marked Ruth's window. Glenn wrote Glenn's garage on the workbench, then added new above it. You think the movers will take it to the old garage? Ruth asked. I'm preventing error. You're moving 12 miles. People have driven farther by mistake. The words on the tape did not feel like claims. They felt like directions written by people who expected to arrive. Marcy and Lynn rang the bell at 7:30, carrying coffee and breakfast sandwiches. Marcy read the label on the dining table and looked at Ruth. That one's good, she said. The movers arrived at 8. Inez came at 8:10 to collect cleaning supplies for the old house. Theo arrived at 8:20 with a hand truck and immediately began arguing with Glenn about whether the garage boxes had been packed safely. Daniel pulled in at 9 exactly. He came through the front door without trying the handle first. He looked around at the blue labels, his face unreadable. Desk? He asked. Den, Glenn said. They removed the drawers, separated the writing surface, and wrapped the curved top. Daniel remembered which screws released the side supports. Glenn had forgotten one. You showed me, Daniel said, when Glenn asked how he knew. When? When we moved it out of Grandpa's house. You were barely helping. I was 30. You complained the entire day. I can complain and retain information. Together, they guided the desk through the hallway. Daniel walked backward, taking most of the weight. At the front door, he noticed the shallow box on the floor marked Decide Later. The block plane lay on top. What's happening with that? Glenn adjusted his grip. Daniel, I'm asking. You are holding a desk. I can do both. Theo came up behind them. Need another set of hands? Daniel looked at him. We've got it. They carried the desk to the moving truck. When Daniel returned, Theo was in the garage placing a carton beside his hand truck. The box was labeled Theo Tools. Daniel stopped. What's that? Glenn looked up from the workbench. Tools I'm giving Theo. Which tools? A socket set, 2 hand saws, some clamps. You told me nothing was assigned. That was before I assigned them. Daniel gave a short laugh. Of course. Theo straightened. I can leave them. No, Glenn said. They're yours. Daniel pointed toward the box. He gets Dad's tools because he fixed a porch rail? Because he uses them. So would I. You have 2 saws in your garage that I gave you. This isn't about saws. No, Glenn said. It isn't. The movers continued past them carrying the guest room mattress. Marcy appeared at the garage door but did not interrupt. Daniel's face had gone red. He gets to hang around your workshop and suddenly he's family? Theo looked toward the driveway. I should give you some room. Stay, Glenn said. The word surprised everyone, including Glenn. He leaned against the workbench. Theo comes to the workshop, he said. He asks how to do something, then he stays long enough to learn. He brings the tools back clean. He helps when I ask, without deciding what I should do next. Daniel looked away. If you wanted to use the tools with me, Glenn continued, you could have come. You still can, but you don't get them because someday I won't need them. I work. So does Theo. I have a family, so do we. The sentence landed without cruelty. That made Daniel flinch. Glenn touched the decide later box with the toe of his boot. I know why you want the plane, he said. I'm not ready to give it to you while every conversation feels like an estate sale. Daniel swallowed. I never wanted you dead. I know. You act like I did. You acted like you were next. For several seconds, only the moving truck's liftgate made noise. Daniel looked at his watch. His 2 hours were nearly over. Then he bent, picked up the decide later box, and carried it toward the truck. This goes where? He asked. Glenn's garage, Ruth said. New garage, Glenn added. Daniel nodded. He stayed 4 hours. By late afternoon, the house had emptied into echoes. Marcy and Lynn went ahead to direct boxes. Theo followed with the tools. Inez remained with Ruth and Glenn for the final cleaning. Ruth walked through each room. The hutch's wall was blank. The bedroom held dust outlines where the nightstands had stood. In the kitchen, the chandelier remained for the buyers. Glenn waited at the front door with the old brass locks in Curtis's box. You're taking those? Ruth asked. They're brass. She let him. The dining table was already at Linden Court, carrying its blue label across town. Ruth closed the door behind them and turned the new key for the last time. Then she left it in the lockbox Celia had attached to the rail. At Linden Court, the garage was full, the kitchen was ugly, and every room contained at least one box placed incorrectly. The dining table stood beneath the east windows. Our table remained attached to its edge. Daniel was beside it, peeling off the tape. Ruth touched his hand. Leave that one, she said. He looked at her, then pressed the label flat again. Daniel left the label in place. Marcy arrived from the kitchen carrying a stack of paper plates and stopped when she saw all three of them around the table. Are we eating? She asked. We don't have food, Ruth said. Lynn is getting sandwiches. We have no refrigerator. I know. That's why she's getting sandwiches. Glenn lowered himself into a dining chair and looked around. The electric fireplace glowed red without producing much heat. Does anybody know which box has the coffee maker? New kitchen, Marcy said. There are 12 boxes that say new kitchen. I followed instructions. Daniel pulled out the chair across from Glenn. I can stop somewhere on the way home. You're staying? Marcy asked. I can eat a sandwich. I meant because you've been checking the time since 9. Daniel glanced at his watch, caught himself, and lowered his arm. I'm staying. Lynn returned with sandwiches, chips, and 6 bottles of water. Inez appeared from across the park, carrying the 3 cans of tomatoes Ruth had refused to return. A housewarming gift, she said. These are our tomatoes, Ruth replied, not after crossing property lines. Theo found the box containing the coffee maker in the garage beneath a carton labeled bathroom fragile. No one admitted packing it there. They ate around the scarred table while the last daylight faded beyond the windows. Boxes filled the living room, the geese watched from the bathroom walls, and the kitchen refrigerator alcove stood empty. Glenn's desk waited beside the false fireplace, partly wrapped in moving blankets. One slat in the tambour had shifted during the move, leaving the curved top stuck halfway open. Daniel noticed it. I can come back and help with that, he said. Glenn looked over. All right. Saturday? All right. No one said the word promise. After everyone left, Ruth and Glenn discovered that the movers had placed one nightstand in the correct bedroom and the other in the second bedroom beneath a box of books. The bedding was in a carton marked linens, which seemed useful until they found 3 other cartons with the same label. At 11, they made the bed. Ruth sat on the edge while Glenn fought with a pillowcase. Do you miss the house? He asked. We left it 6 hours ago. That wasn't my question. She looked around the room. The walnut bed fit with 15 inches to spare on Glenn's side and 20 on hers. Their lamps stood on mismatched surfaces because one nightstand remained trapped. Blue tape reading new bedroom crossed the footboard. I miss knowing where the toilet paper is, she said. It's in the goose bathroom. I saw the empty holder. There's a box. The box contains towels, useful adjacent supplies. Go to sleep. They turned off the lamps. Through the unfamiliar dark came the faint hiss of tires on a wet street, then silence. No branch scraped the gutter, no refrigerator clicked. Ruth waited for the new house to feel like a mistake. Instead, she heard Glenn's breathing settle beside her. It reached Ruth before she opened her eyes, a warm line across the blanket. She followed it into the living room, where the small, upholstered chair waited beside the window, with Ruth's window still attached. She sat down. Across the park, Inez opened her curtains. Her silhouette appeared in the glass, holding a mug. She lifted one hand. Ruth waved back. The refrigerator arrived before noon. It fit the alcove, ran quietly, and required no consultation with a telephone. The delivery man asked whether they wanted the door handles on the left or right. Ruth and Glenn disagreed. They spent 20 minutes testing imaginary grocery trips before choosing the left. The delivery man changed the handles without once suggesting that their ages made the decision urgent. The final papers cleared, checks moved between accounts. After the moving bill, repairs, deposits, refrigerator, closing costs, and Patricia's credits, the Mercers had less money than Marcy had once imagined, and more than enough to live carefully. No one became rich. The roof at Linden Court remained 14 years old. Their old house belonged to someone else. Ruth drove past it only once, by accident. The for sale sign was gone. A different car stood in the driveway. The dining room curtains had been removed, exposing the chandelier she hated. She did not slow down. At Linden Court, their life began arranging itself without a binder. Glenn went to the workshop twice a week. He could drive there in daylight, but Ruth often dropped him off on her way to the library. Inez introduced them to a Thursday supper group that met in the apartment community room. The first meal was baked chicken and potatoes. The second was chili hot enough to erase conversation for several minutes. Ruth found she liked being expected somewhere for reasons that did not involve solving a problem. Marcy tested the new boundaries with care. She called one morning because a plumber was scheduled at her house during an appointment she could not move. For years, Ruth would have changed her own plans before Marcy finished asking. "I'm meeting Inez at the library," Ruth said. "You could go later?" "Yes." Marcy waited. Ruth waited too. "Never mind," Marcy said finally. "Lynn can come home. Is she able? She'll rearrange lunch." Ruth felt the old urge to rescue everyone from inconvenience. "All right," she said. Marcy did not sulk. She handled it. On her next visit, she asked before opening a kitchen cabinet. The question was so unnatural that Ruth laughed. "I was going to get a glass," Marcy said. "You may access the glasses without written consent. I'm adjusting. So are we." Marcy still gave advice. She disliked the electric fireplace, wanted them to replace the bathroom wallpaper immediately, and thought the dining table overwhelmed the breakfast area. Then she caught Ruth looking at her and added, "But it's your table." "It is. And it looks good." "It does not." "No, but it fits." That was enough. Daniel missed the first Saturday. At 10:15, he called Glenn and said something had come up. Glenn replied that the desk would still be there the following week. His voice remained pleasant. Afterward, he stood beside the jammed tambour for several minutes. "Call Theo," Ruth said. "I asked Daniel. You asked him to help. He didn't. He said next week. You can wait." Glenn looked at the half-open desk. He waited 6 days. Daniel canceled again on Friday evening because of work. Glenn called Theo. Theo arrived Saturday with clamps, glue, and a piece of walnut veneer. He and Glenn removed the tambour from the desk and laid it across the dining table on a folded blanket. One canvas backing strip had separated from the wooden slats. "You can re-glue it," Theo said. "I know. You were staring. I was waiting for you to reach the correct conclusion." Theo numbered the slats in pencil before lifting them. Glenn stopped him. "Not there. Mark the back edge. Nobody sees this side. You see it now. That feels temporary." Ruth left them arguing and walked across the park to Inez's apartment. The sewing rocker stood near Inez's living room window. A blue cushion had replaced Ruth's flattened beige one. The chair looked different and entirely itself. "You changed the cushion," Ruth said. "You hated that cushion. It conformed to me. It had surrendered." Ruth sat in the rocker. It still squeaked at the end of each backward motion. "Do you want it back?" Inez asked. "No?" "Good. I would refuse." The answer pleased Ruth more than gratitude would have. When she returned home, Daniel's pickup was parked near the entrance. He stood in the living room, watching Theo and Glenn work at the dining table. His coat remained on, though the house was warm. "I thought you were doing it next week," Daniel said. Glenn fitted 2 slats together. "The desk was ready this week." "You could have called. I called twice. I told you work was crazy. I heard you." Theo reached for the glue. Daniel's gaze followed his hand. "You're replacing the canvas?" he asked. "Reusing it," Theo said. "Only one edge separated. It'll separate again. Not if it's clamped flat." Daniel stepped closer. Grandpa repaired it once. Glenn looked up. "When?" "Before we moved it. The top stuck then, too." "I don't remember that." "I do." Daniel took off his coat and draped it over Ruth's window chair. He touched the loose backing. "He used flour paste," he said. "It left that pale line." Glenn bent close. "That old fool. You taught me not to call him that. He isn't here." Daniel smiled despite himself. Theo moved aside. "You want to hold this edge?" Daniel looked at Glenn. Glenn handed him a clamp. They worked for 3 hours. Daniel did not receive the block plane. He did not ask. Glenn showed him how to align the tambour slats so they rolled evenly, and Daniel listened without checking his phone. When Theo left, Daniel stayed to help Glenn reinstall the top. The desk opened and closed smoothly. "Come to the workshop next Saturday," Glenn said. Daniel wiped glue from his fingers. "What are you working on?" "The cabinet Theo keeps sanding incorrectly. He says you keep changing your mind. He lacks discipline." Daniel glanced toward the garage. 10, 9, 9:30. 9. Daniel smiled. "Fine." He came at 9:15. Glenn complained for exactly 5 minutes and then handed him an apron. By late summer, most of the blue moving labels had disappeared. Ruth left our table in place longer than the others. Its edges curled each time she wiped the wood. Eventually, Marcy asked whether she could remove it. "Not yet," Ruth said. The yellow serving bowl remained in a kitchen cabinet at Linden Court. Marcy never mentioned it. Ruth offered it to her on a warm Sunday evening, after Marcy and Lynn arrived for supper, carrying a casserole. "This is for you," Ruth said. Marcy took the bowl with both hands. "Why?" "Because I want you to have it. Are you sure?" "Yes." Marcy ran her thumb over a tiny chip near the rim. "I thought this was from Grandma Mercer." "No. It came from a gas station promotion in 1978. "You're kidding." "Your father bought enough gasoline to complete the set. We broke the other 3. Glenn called from the living room. "That bowl cost us a transmission." "It did not." The Buick disagreed. Marcy laughed. She set the bowl carefully beside her purse instead of carrying it immediately to the car. Daniel arrived with bread and no request for money. Theo followed with a jar of pickles. Inez brought tomatoes, fresh this time, and announced that ownership transferred upon entry. They extended both leaves of the dining table. It crowded the room exactly as predicted. To reach her seat, Ruth had to turn sideways between the wall and Daniel's chair. No one suggested replacing it. Glenn sat at one end, Ruth at the other. Marcy and Lynn took one side. Daniel sat beside Theo, arguing about the correct way to sharpen a plane blade. Inez served tomatoes to people who had not requested them. The relationships had not become easy. Marcy still began sentences with, "What you should do," then sometimes stopped before completing them. Daniel was learning to offer time before asking for things, though he remained better at the second half. Glenn continued mistaking silence for peace on bad days. Ruth still counted love in completed errands when she was tired, but Marcy rang the bell. Daniel came on Saturdays. The third key remained with Inez, who used it only once when Ruth locked herself out while carrying library books. She opened the door, handed Ruth the key, and did not rearrange a single room. After supper, Lynn and Marcy washed dishes. Daniel and Theo carried the extra chairs to the garage. Glenn wrapped leftovers in enough foil to interfere with radio signals. Ruth wiped the dining table. The OUR table label had finally come loose. She peeled it away and held it in her hand. The wood beneath was slightly cleaner, a pale blue-edged memory of the move. As she bent to check for crumbs, she saw another piece of tape beneath the table's edge. It was older, darkened by dust, and partly folded against the wood. Ruth worked a fingernail beneath it. The black writing had faded. The first letter might have been an S or a T. She could not tell whether Daniel had once written "sell" or whether this was the label that had declared the table trash. "What did you find?" Marcy asked from the sink. "Nothing we need." Ruth peeled the old label free. In the kitchen, the wastebasket belonged to her. So did the floor beneath it, the light through the eastern windows, the crowded table, and the evening still unfolding around her. She dropped both labels into the basket and went back to the room where everyone had learned to ask before taking a chair.